Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, here to guide you today. Many of you use these videos to relax or drift off to sleep, so before we begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. By the way, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Now, settle in, get comfy, and let's begin. The shadow. The first time I noticed the shadow, it was just past midnight. The only light in the living room came from a weak street lamp outside. I was slumped in the old armchair near the fireplace, its cushions faintly scented with stale tobacco and damp wood. After another restless day, I had been trying to calm my nerves. The silence pressed against me like a thick blanket, and I remember the warmth of my own breath filling my nostrils as I exhaled. Then, from the corner of my vision, I caught movement. It was a dark shape, gliding smoothly across the far wall. I turned sharply, my neck stiff from hours of tension. There should have been nothing there. The corner lamp was off, and the curtains were drawn. The only light was the golden glow from the street lamp, but I saw it again. A black shape slid along the plaster wall, moving as though cast by a figure standing between the wall and a non-existent light source's shadow without a body. I stood, my knees tight and shaky. Each step toward the wall made the floorboards whisper low creaks I could feel in my teeth. As I approached, the shadow receded, slithering into dim corners, flattening itself into angles as though it belonged there. It reminded me of a frightened animal flinching from my presence, but refusing to vanish entirely. When I reached out, my hand brushed the cold, smooth paint. Nothing. I had come to this old house about a week earlier, an inheritance from an uncle I barely knew. It was no grand estate, just a single-story home at the end of a narrow road in a sleepy town. The kind of place that feels too old, its walls holding memories best left undisturbed. I planned to stay only a few nights, sort through papers and furniture, decide what to keep, and prepare to sell. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed the shadow. Before that, there had been signs. The faint metallic tang in the air, the way my skin prickled as I passed through the hallway to the living room, the lingering scent of varnish. Then there was the antique mirror I had found in the storage closet. Oval-shaped with a chipped frame and a faintly cloudy swirl at its center, the glass made my reflection look off, as if it refused to show my face properly. I had leaned it against a corner wall, unsure what to do with it. That night, after my first attempt to confront the shadow, I sat in the armchair, every muscle tense. Occasionally, I caught a glimpse, a quick slither of dark fluidity at the edge of my vision. A shadow, unbound and watching. Each time I turned my head, the shadow darted away, slipping behind shelves or flattening itself beneath furniture outlines. If I moved toward it too quickly, it faded instantly, leaving no shape or trace. When I tried shining my flashlight directly at it, the beam cut through empty space, no form, no silhouette. Yet, the moment I settled back and shifted my focus, it would reappear, closer than before. Exhaustion clawed at me, but every time my eyes began to droop, the overwhelming sensation of being watched jolted me awake. Sweat clung to my skin, and my heart pounded as if I had been running for hours. As dawn broke, I forced myself into action. Marching into the small kitchen, I splashed my face with cold water and boiled coffee. The bitter, metallic taste steadied my nerves, though it sat uneasily on my tongue. Determined to make sense of what was happening, I began exploring the house by daylight. Dust motes swirled in the morning sun, settling over old furniture and creaky shelves. I searched through drawers and piles of my late uncle's papers, but found nothing that explained the events of the night before. Eventually, the mirror caught my attention again. It stood apart from the rest of the house's decor, older, its wooden frame carved with strange, swirling patterns and notch-like symbols I hadn't noticed before. Running my fingertips over the grooves left me uneasy, as though the designs held a purpose I couldn't decipher. I covered the mirror with a sheet and placed it face down against the wall. The rest of the day passed quietly enough. I tried to rationalize the shadow, convincing myself it was a trick of the light or my tired mind. Still, I felt on edge. By the time dusk fell, the familiar tension returned. My chest tightened, and my breath grew shallow. I armed myself with a flashlight, lit a lantern near the door, and kept my phone's weak light as a backup. I waited in the living room, knees bent, every muscle taut. For a long time, there was only silence, the drumming of my pulse in my ears. Then I saw it. The shadow emerged from behind the covered mirror, sliding out from beneath the fabric like ink seeping through cloth. This time, it moved more deliberately, tracing a path along the wall above the fireplace. As I watched, it began forming shapes, geometric patterns, and twisted runes that stretched and shifted. The symbols flowed seamlessly into one another, as if the shadow was trying to convey something incomprehensible. I stepped closer, my breath hitching, but when I moved too near, the shadow darted away, curling into a corner near an old cabinet. Frustration bubbled over. I shouted, my voice echoing hollowly through the room. The shadow didn't respond with sound, but its presence thickened, the air growing heavy. My skin prickled, and an acrid taste of fear lingered in the back of my throat. Flicking the flashlight toward the cabinet revealed nothing but pale plaster. Still, I realized something chilling. The shadow was following me. Testing this theory, I turned my back and pretended to ignore it. From the corner of my vision, I saw it inching closer, sliding along the walls and curling around doorframes. Each time I spun around quickly, it pulled back, almost as if it were toying with me. I needed a new plan. My thoughts drifted to the mirror. If the shadow was tied to it, if uncovering the mirror had awakened something, perhaps I could force it back. Heart pounding, I approached the mirror. Its sheeted form loomed in the corner, a silent menace. Keeping my gaze partially averted, I knelt, gripping the edges of the frame. Slowly, I tilted it upright, removing the sheet with a trembling hand. The mirror's surface appeared dull, almost foggy, as if a thin layer of dust was trapped between the glass and reality. Tilting it to catch the faint light in the room, I heard a faint scraping sound behind me, like a fingernail dragging across wood. I turned the mirror toward the wall where the shadow had been, hoping it would reflect something, anything. At first, the glass revealed only my own silhouette. Then, a flicker of movement rippled across the reflection, a dark shape slicing through the background like ink bleeding into water. Panic surged. I slammed the mirror down, the frame rattling against the floorboards. My breathing was ragged as the shadow scattered, retreating toward the ceiling. The lantern's flame wavered, casting erratic light across the room. My stomach lurched as the dimness deepened, the weight of the house pressing down on me. For a moment, I considered fleeing, grabbing my keys, and driving as far as I could. But a single, horrifying thought stopped me. I draped sheets over every reflective surface I could find: the mirror, the framed pictures, even the television screen. Searching through drawers, I found a cracked hand mirror and placed it face down in a box. Without reflections, I hoped the shadow would have nowhere to hide. For a brief moment, I felt safer. Moving slowly around the room, I kept my back close to the wall, listening for even the slightest shift. The silence was profound, pressing in on me like a heavy weight. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again, a faint, unmistakable shape moving across the ceiling. This time, it was elongated, upside down, its form twisting into impossible angles. It stretched and folded, carving jagged symbols that made my stomach churn. I raised my flashlight, aiming the beam upward. For a brief moment, I saw shallow scratches etched into the plaster marks that hadn't been there before. My heart thudded painfully as I realized the shadow was carving itself into the house, leaving its presence behind in ways I couldn't ignore. My chest tightened as I shouted, my voice cracking. There was no response, only a long whispering sound as the shape retracted. It left behind faint grooves I could feel with my trembling fingertips, lines that seemed to spell out a message I couldn't comprehend. I knew I had to leave. Grabbing my jacket, I stumbled toward the front door, nearly knocking over a stack of old newspapers in my haste. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, biting against my skin. I sucked in deep breaths, trying to steady the shaking in my legs. The street was empty except for the distant hum of a car and the rustling of leaves. For a moment, I considered never going back, But the house, the papers, the mirror, this was my responsibility now. What if I unleashed whatever was inside on someone else? After several minutes, I forced myself to re-enter. Inside, the lantern's flame had died. I relit it carefully, the faint glow casting flickering shadows across the room. The shadow itself wasn't immediately visible, though the faint scratches near the ceiling remained. I walked around slowly, whispering curses under my breath, my frustration mounting. By the time dawn approached, I felt hollow, feverish. My heart still pounded, and my muscles throbbed with exhaustion. Now, it's morning again. I haven't slept. The mirror leans covered in the corner of the room, but its presence feels heavier than ever. I don't know how to rid myself of this thing. It hasn't harmed me directly, hasn't touched me, but I can feel it draining something intangible, my sense of being alone in my own skin. Every so often, I see faint movements out of the corner of my eye, a shadow bending along the baseboard or flickering in the reflection of a window pane. I've decided to leave today, but even as I pack my things, I know it might follow. When I look at my phone's black screen to check the time, I catch a glimpse of something shifting behind me, folding into impossible shapes. The weight of unseen eyes lingers on my back, their chill settling deep in my bones whenever I turn away from reflective surfaces. I don't know what it wants or why it chose this house, but it's not gone. The marks on the walls remain. The memory of its silent presence will follow me, a haunting echo. And the next time I catch my reflection in some random storefront window, I'll know to look closely for the flicker of darkness sliding along the edges, waiting for me to turn my back. It happened again tonight. I was lying in bed, struggling to breathe evenly, when I saw its sleek shape gliding across the patch of dry grass near the back fence. The movement caught my eye because it was too smooth, too silent. Usually, cats make some noise, the scratch of claws on bark, the rustle of leaves, or the soft patting of paws on soil. But this one was different. It drifted, barely touching the ground, as if guided by an invisible hand. Then its eyes turned toward me, faded, almost colorless, like washed-out marbles. They seemed to drill into me through the glass. My heart jolted, and I sat up, gripping the edge of the mattress. My chest tightened as I tried to focus on my breathing, but the cat didn't move. Something was off. The whites of its eyes were normal, but the irises were pale and drained, as if the animal had bled all its color into the night. I swallowed hard, tasting bitter saliva. I stayed still, hoping it would lose interest and slink away. But it didn't. It was there yesterday, and the day before, always at twilight, always watching. I'm not from here. I inherited this old house after my uncle passed. No children, no closer family besides me. I moved in a few months ago, intending to fix the creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, then sell it. The house is older than I realized. Every step I take brings a moan of protest from the wood, and every brass doorknob clings to my fingers with an unpleasant chill. I thought I could handle it, but since that cat appeared, the house feels different. It no longer feels entirely mine. Unable to bear it, I got up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. The back porch light barely illuminated the yard, but I could still make out the cat's silhouette. "Go," I hissed, knocking on the glass with my knuckles. It didn't budge. Instead, it tilted its head, as if trying to understand me. My spine prickled, and I clenched my jaw. I was done with this game. I stormed down the hallway, flipping on every light, and yanked open the kitchen door that led outside. I didn't bother with shoes. The night air smelled of damp leaves and old wood as my bare feet touched the rough concrete step. I expected the cat to run, to bolt into the shadows like any other animal. But it didn't. It sat perfectly still near the fence, its tail curled neatly around its paws. "Get out," I shouted, my voice shaking. The cat blinked slowly, its pale, drained eyes fixed on me. Then, right in front of me, it vanished, not fled, not faded into the shadows. It blinked out of existence, like a light switched off. One heartbeat it was there, the next, it was gone. It had been there solid, tangible, and then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. My legs felt weak. and I gripped the porch railing to steady myself. Before I could catch my breath, I heard a faint scraping sound behind me. I turned. There it was again, perched on the opposite corner of the yard, staring at me. My mouth went dry as I backed away, one hand blindly groping for the door handle. Once inside, I locked everything, the doors, the windows, even the old pantry latch. My breaths came fast and shallow, my mind spinning with desperate attempts at rationalization. Maybe I was hallucinating, maybe the dim light played tricks on my eyes. Tossing and turning in a feverish haze, I imagined the cat's pale eyes pressed against the window pane, tracking every shift of my blankets. Unable to bear the oppressive silence, I got up and rummaged through the old closets for something to distract me. My search led to a dusty shoebox filled with documents and faded photographs. Most of the images depicted the house as it once was, a family gathered on the porch, an older man holding a lantern near a barn that no longer stood. Then one photo caught my eye. It showed a young woman standing at the back fence, cradling something small in her arms. Behind her, barely visible, was a slim, cat-like shape with pointed ears. The figure had no defined face, only the pale spots where eyes should have been. A chill ran down my spine as I placed the photo aside, my heart pounding. I tried to calm myself by making tea, the bitter smell of the leaves filling the kitchen. But as I poured the steaming liquid, my reflection in the dark window above the sink caught my attention. There I was, tired eyes, disheveled hair. And behind me, in the faint reflection, stood something else. The yard was quiet, bathed in the soft light of early evening. I hammered a loose board on the porch rail, took out the trash, and tried to reestablish a sense of normalcy. But by early evening, I had locked all the doors and closed the curtains. The silence inside the house felt oppressive, as though it were growing heavier with each passing moment. I paced the living room, glancing nervously at the old grandfather clock near the stairs. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound. It was soft, like nails dragging lightly across wood, and it was coming from the hallway that led to my bedroom. Swallowing hard, I stepped lightly over the creaking floorboards, each step sounding like a warning whisper urging me to turn back. Reaching the bedroom door, I pressed my ear against it. Silence. Holding my breath, I turned the knob and stepped inside. The cat was there. It perched on top of my dresser, its tail swishing lazily from side to side. My heart stopped. The windows were closed. The door had been locked. How did it get in? The air felt thick, pressing in on me as though the room itself were shrinking. My head pounded, my vision blurred, and the acrid smell of my own sweat filled my nose. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. Taking deep, shaky breaths, I realized I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to know what this thing was. If I didn't understand it, I feared I'd lose my mind. Hours of searching the house finally led me to a small wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the study. Inside, I found yellowed, flaking notes and another photograph. This image showed a man my great-grandfather, I think, holding an ornate mirror. The frame was carved with twisting shapes that resembled curled tails and pointed ears. On the back of the photo was a single word, Sentinel. Finally, I noticed something odd about the attic door. The paint on the panel bore a faint outline, as though something had once hung there. The smell of stale dust and old wood choked me as I climbed into the attic, my flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. Behind a stack of rotting boards, I found it, the mirror. Its surface was grimy, but faint carvings along the frame were visible, delicate, almost alive. Something about it made my eyes water and my skin prickle as though charged with static. As I tried to lift the mirror, a soft thump echoed from the attic's far corner. Swinging the flashlight beam toward the sound, I saw it. The cat sat there, its pale, empty eyes reflecting the light without color. My pulse skyrocketed, and my throat tightened. I knew, in that moment, that the cat and the mirror were connected. It wasn't just watching me. It was guarding something, observing me, recording me, preparing the space for whatever force lurked beyond my understanding. It was there, solid and real, and then, in the next heartbeat, it was gone. A metallic tong filled my mouth, sharp and bitter, as I stumbled back. My flashlight trembled in my hand, its beam slicing erratically through the dust-filled attic air. The cat remained where it had been, its pale, empty eyes blinking slowly. With each blink, I felt a pulse in my chest, as if it were syncing itself with the rhythm of my own heartbeat. The floor beneath me seemed to shift. My vision swam, and I dropped to one knee, gasping for breath. I had to act. Summoning the last shreds of my courage, I lunged forward and snatched the mirror from where it rested on the floor. Its metal frame bit into my palms, its ornate carvings sharp and cold. The cat hissed. The sound wasn't natural, it was dry, rasping, almost like sandpaper scraping over bone. A wave of nausea washed over me as I held the mirror between us, aiming it at the creature as if it could somehow protect me. For a fleeting moment, the cat's reflection shimmered in the glass. It twisted and smeared, as though the mirror itself rejected its image. Then the cat vanished. This time, it didn't immediately reappear. I scrambled out of the attic, clutching the mirror tightly against my chest. Once downstairs, I leaned the mirror face down against the hallway wall, hoping that without its reflective surface exposed, the cat's presence would lose its grip on the house. But I knew better. Even as I wiped sweat from my brow, I felt its lingering presence, as if those pale eyes were watching me from just beyond the edge of my vision. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house set me on edge. The silence felt alive, charged with something malevolent. My skin prickled constantly, as though invisible fingers were brushing over my arms and neck. I tried to convince myself I had gained some measure of control by hiding the mirror, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only interrupted whatever was happening. By morning, exhaustion had hollowed me out. When I dared to look into the hallway, the mirror was still there, leaning where I had left it. But something was different. The carvings along its frame appeared more detailed, as though grime had been shed overnight. I swore I saw tiny shape-scats etched into the metal, their hollow eyes staring back. My heart fluttered as I realized, this isn't over. When I rubbed my eyes and glanced at my reflection in the window, my breath caught. For a split second, I thought my irises looked pale, washed out, just like the cat's. I pulled away, heart pounding. The house felt alive around me, pressing in as though it had absorbed the presence of the sentinel. It knew me now. It knew my routines, the layout of the rooms, the places I tried to hide. It had my scent, my fear. Outside, a branch scraped against the window, the sound faint but sharp like claws. I jumped, choking on my breath. I forced myself to look into the glass again. My face stared back at me, pale and sweaty, eyes wide with exhaustion. But just behind me, in the faint reflection of the dim hallway, the shadows seemed to shift. I turned away, refusing to acknowledge the subtle distortion at the edge of my vision. It wasn't gone, it was waiting, and the next time it came, I wouldn't know where it was or what it wanted. Even now, as I sit in the stillness of the house, I can feel the weight of its presence pressing on me. The sentinel hasn't left. Its emptiness has become part of me, carved into the edges of my mind like the grooves etched into the mirror's frame. I no longer trust my own reflection. I know that one day when I look again, it won't be my face staring back. Inside, half outside, caught between the dim safety of my apartment and the shadowed emptiness of the hallway. The air felt heavier there, pressing against my chest with a chill that seemed to seep straight into my bones. I leaned against the doorframe, my fingers gripping the wood so tightly they ached. My eyes locked on the mirror at the end of the hall. Something was different about it. The frame, ornate and chipped, seemed darker, as though it had absorbed the faint light of the corridor. The reflection inside appeared warped, off. The corridor in the mirror didn't match the one before me. The walls were at strange angles, the shadows stretched unnaturally long, and then I saw it. A faint figure moving in the glass, just barely visible in dark, shifting blur that wasn't in the real hallway. My heart raced. I took a shaky step backward, retreating into the apartment. But then I stopped. A strange sensation, like invisible hands pressing on my back, seemed to push me forward. urging me to leave the safety of my space and step further into the hall. The reflection in the mirror began to ripple, the dark figure becoming clearer, a form hunched and indistinct, as though made of smoke or shadow. It didn't move toward me, it simply stood, waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the door shut, twisting the lock so hard my wrist ached. The knocking didn't resume, nor did the scraping or rattling. But I could still feel it, something watching, waiting just beyond the threshold. That night, I didn't sleep. The air in the apartment felt charged, thick with something I couldn't explain. My mind raced with questions. What was in the mirror? Why was it here? What did it want from me? Even now, as I sit in a cheap motel room miles away, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. Reflections seem wrong. Mirrors, windows, even the black screen of my phone, they all feel like doorways waiting for something to step through. And late at night, when the world falls silent, I swear I still hear it. The faint sound of tapping, a muffled groan. The gentle creak of a door slowly opening on its own. And I wonder if it's waiting for me to look back just one more time. The figures in the painting seem to lean forward, almost imperceptibly, as if watching me. Their blurred, featureless faces create a weight in my chest, a silent pressure that seems to demand my attention. I can't help but step closer, drawn by a compulsion I can't explain. My reflection flickers faintly in the glass that protects the canvas, but something about it feels off. The lighting in the gallery is stark, yet the area around this painting feels dim, as though the figures are somehow absorbing the light, pulling it into their hollow presence. I step back, trying to shake the feeling that I'm being observed. The air feels heavy now, and that faint scent I noticed earlier, sweet and cloying, grows stronger. I glance over my shoulder at the empty corridor behind me, but the sensation of being watched doesn't fade. I move further down the hallway. Another painting catches my eye. This one is smaller, almost intimate in size, but its subject matter is no less unnerving. It depicts a single chair in the middle of a dark room, illuminated by an unseen light source. The shadows on the walls are jagged, almost claw-like, and the longer I look, the more I feel as though the shadows are moving, shifting subtly across the canvas. I blink and step away, but I can't shake the feeling that something is pulling at my thoughts, reaching for a part of me I'd rather keep hidden. Deeper into the gallery, the air grows colder. I pass by several more paintings, each more disquieting than the last. A field of empty shoes lined up in perfect rows. A staircase that seems to twist into itself. A woman's silhouette at a window, her hands pressed against the glass, but her face obscured by a fog that refuses to clear. I want to leave, but my legs carry me forward, deeper into the labyrinth of corridors. Finally, I reach the end of the gallery, where a single painting hangs in isolation. The painting itself is abstract black streaks slashing across a pale gray background, but the longer I look, the more I begin to see shapes in the chaos. Figures, a face. My stomach tightens, and I stumble backward, nearly knocking over a pedestal behind me. I glance around the gallery, suddenly aware of how quiet it's become. The faint hum of air conditioning has disappeared, and even the sound of my own breathing feels muffled. The paintings around me seem closer, their frames subtly angled toward where I stand, like an audience waiting for me to act. I turn to leave, but the corridor stretches out longer than I remember. The walls feel narrower, the light dimmer. I quicken my pace, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the confined space. When I finally reach the exit, I glance back over my shoulder one last time. The painting at the end of the gallery, the one with the slashing black streaks, has changed. The shapes are no longer abstract. They form a shadowy figure, its featureless face tilted in my direction. Watching, waiting. The sight of the emergency exit sign sends a wave of relief through me, but it's dulled by the thick, sugary smell that clings to the air like a heavy fog. My steps quicken, each one echoing unnaturally in the empty corridor. The eyes from the paintings seem to follow me, even those that don't have faces. I resist the urge to glance back, knowing that if I do, I might see something I'm not prepared for. As I approach the glowing exit sign, the hum from the walls intensifies, a low vibration that seems to burrow into my skull. My legs feel heavier with each step, as if the air itself is trying to hold me in place. I reach the door, my trembling hand grasping the cold metal handle. With a deep breath, I yank it open. Instead of the cool night air, I'm greeted by another corridor. The walls here are darker, the light dimmer. The air is colder but still carries that cloying sweetness. My heart sinks as I realize the exit didn't lead outside, it only pulled me deeper into this labyrinth. I hesitate, but the sound of a faint rustling behind me spurs me forward. The paintings here are larger, more elaborate. Some span entire walls, their gilded frames gleaming even in the dim light. The figures within them have grown more detailed now. They wear expressions, subtle but unmistakable: fear, anticipation, amusement. One painting stops me in my tracks. It's massive, filling the wall from floor to ceiling. The frame is intricately carved with patterns I can't quite place, twisted forms that seem to shift as I stare at them. Inside the painting, I see a room that looks eerily familiar. It's the gallery. The same polished floor, the same dim lights, the same unsettling paintings hanging on the walls. In the center of the painted room stands a figure, faceless, featureless, but its posture is unmistakably human. And it's staring at me. The humming grows louder, almost deafening, and the air seems to thrum with unseen energy. I take a step back, and the figure in the painting tilts its head, mirroring my movement. I stumble, nearly falling, and when I glance back at the painting, the figure is gone. My pulse races as I whip my head around, scanning the corridor. The air feels heavier, and for the first time, I feel something behind me. I don't dare turn around. Instead, I break into a run, following the corridor as it twists and narrows. The walls seem closer now, the paintings leaning inward as if to watch me pass. At last, I see another door ahead. This one is unmarked, plain wood with no handle. I slam into it, desperate for escape. It doesn't budge. Behind me, the hum stops. The silence is worse. I turn slowly, heart pounding so hard it drowns out my thoughts. The corridor is empty, but the largest painting, the one of the gallery, is now on the wall directly behind me. The figure has returned, standing at the center of the painted room. Except now, the room in the painting isn't just the gallery, it's the corridor I'm standing in. And the figure isn't in the painting anymore. It's standing right in front of me. I don't remember screaming, but I hear it echoing as the darkness rushes in. I rush toward the door, my footsteps echoing sharply in the narrow gallery corridor. Subtlety no longer matters. The urgency of escape overrides everything else. Behind me, I sense the painting shifting, the weight of unseen eyes pressing on my back. The air feels heavier with each step, thick with that sickly sweet aroma that clings to my throat and nostrils. My breath comes in short gasps as I push forward. I refuse to look back, though I swear I hear faint rustling or the scrape of something moving across canvas. The scent grows overwhelming, making my eyes water and my stomach churn. I cough, nearly gagging, but I keep moving. My hand slams against the exit bar with all the strength I can muster. The door gives way, swinging outward into the night. I stumble onto the street, my knees weak, my balance shaky. The cool air hits my face like a slap, and for a moment, I gulp it in greedily, my lungs burning. It's dark now, later than I realized, and the street is eerily quiet. The faint hum of a distant car engine is the only sound beyond my labored breathing. I glance back over my shoulder, half expecting to see something emerge from the door behind me, but it swings shut silently, sealing the gallery and whatever lurks inside. Through the glass, I can see only dim lighting and my faint reflection, distorted by the angle of the street lamp's glow. I turn and hurry home, my footsteps brisk against the pavement. The familiar sight of my apartment building brings a flicker of relief. Once inside, I waste no time locking the door, sliding the chain into place, and leaning back against the cool surface. My living room is just as I left it: bare walls, an old couch, and a single floor lamp casting its weak light over the empty space. It should feel safe, but it doesn't. My chest tightens as I sit on the edge of the sofa, my hands trembling as they cradle my head. My breathing is still uneven, my pulse erratic. It's safe here, right? I can almost see them, the painted eyes from the gallery superimposed on the surface, following my every move. The memory of their gaze feels alive, crawling over me like a tangible weight. I rub my face, trying to shake the sensation, but the lingering sweetness in the air won't leave me. It clings to my clothes and skin like an invisible film, suffocating in its persistence. I force myself to my feet, pacing the room. The silence offers no comfort. Every small noise feels amplified, the hum of the overhead light like a static charge in the air. I move to the living room window, pressing my forehead lightly against the cool glass. The city stretches out before me, scattered lights from distant buildings glowing faintly in the dark. For a moment, the ordinary scene calms me until I notice my reflection. My face stares back, tired and drawn, my eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But just over my shoulder, faintly visible in the glass, is something else. A shape faceless, human-like lurks in the corner of my apartment. My heart seizes, and I spin around, the movement sharp and panicked. Nothing's there, just my empty living room, exactly as it should be. I try to laugh, to dismiss it as a trick of my overworked mind, but the sound dies in my throat. I realize, with a sinking dread, that I've brought something back with me. Not a physical object, but a sensation. The presence of those painted eyes, unnatural and intrusive, has followed me. I head to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face in an effort to ground myself. My reflection in the mirror seems normal at first glance, just my pale, tired face. But as I stare longer, something shifts. My pupils look darker, almost too wide, as if my body knows something my mind hasn't fully grasped. I step back, shaking my head, but the uneasy knot in my stomach only tightens. Returning to the living room, I switch off the lamp, thinking the darkness might help. It doesn't. The shadows deepen, and in the absence of light, I feel movement at the edges of my vision. I try to push the thoughts away, telling myself it's just my imagination, but the gallery images remain burned into my mind. The trembling frames, the overpowering perfume, and those silent, faceless figures that seem to grow eyes just for me, they haunt every corner of my memory. I sit on the couch, curling my knees to my chest, and stare into the darkness. The feeling of being watched has only grown stronger. I avoid the window, terrified of seeing something in the reflection again. I know if I look long enough, I might catch a glimpse of them, those painted eyes hovering just beyond the veil of normalcy. The night passes in restless silence, and by the time morning comes, my body feels drained, as though I've been carrying the weight of a second existence. I tell myself I'll go back to the gallery, demand an explanation, find out what those paintings were, and who created them. But deep down, I know I won't. Instead, I pace my apartment, checking every mirror, every reflective surface. I see nothing unusual, but the sense of unease never fades. It's as though the air itself is charged, heavy with the same oppressive tension I felt in the gallery. That evening, as the sun dips below the horizon, I catch something in the corner of my eye, just a flicker of movement near the window. My chest tightens, and I freeze, unable to look directly. The memory of the gallery's faceless figures floods back. The way their eyes appeared, one by one, growing sharper and more deliberate as they watch me. The way the walls seemed to close in, the sweet smell clinging to me even now. I force myself to turn, but the window shows nothing unusual, just the faint reflection of my own apartment. Yet I know better than to trust it. I return to the couch, curling up with the light off, hoping that sleep might finally come. But in the quiet darkness, the feeling remains, a presence, unseen but undeniable. It waits in the periphery, silent and patient, biding its time. I know I'm not alone. Something from the gallery has followed me, and it won't let me forget. I spend the rest of the evening trying to keep myself occupied, even as my thoughts circle back to the window. In the kitchen, I choke down a cold sandwich and sip a cheap beer, the kind that tastes like regret in a can. The hallway looms just out of view, but I refuse to glance down it. My stomach is a knot, my hands clammy, and I keep wiping sweat from my forehead. The silence in the apartment feels oppressive. I don't have a TV or radio, and the only sound is the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional hollow swallow of my own throat. I think about calling anyone, but it's late. Who would believe me if I told them? "Hey, Greg, my bedroom window's showing me a haunted Victorian parlor." Cool, huh? I can practically hear him laugh it off. Maybe he'd ask if I've been drinking. He'd never understand. Finally, I muster the courage to return to the bedroom. My legs feel like lead as I inch closer to the window. The image is still there, unchanged. The figures linger in their corners, barely visible through the dim flickering light of their world. I take a deep breath and approach the glass slowly, studying the shapes more closely. This time, I notice details I hadn't before. One of the figures, a taller, more slender shape, appears to wear lace gloves. The delicate black fabric stretches along impossibly pale arms. Another figure's face is obscured by a translucent veil so fine that I can make out faint, hollow eye sockets behind it. My breath catches, and I have to steady myself against the wall to keep from collapsing. I try an experiment. My fingers trembling, I tap softly on the glass. At first, there's no response. I lean in, pressing my ear closer, straining to hear past the frantic drumbeat of my own heart. Then, faintly, I hear it, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against something, or maybe the creak of a floorboard from their side. I stumble backward, heart pounding, and climb into bed. The blanket comes up to my chin, a child's reflex against a grown man's fear. The lights stay on all night. Sleep is fragmented, broken by every imagined sound, every flicker of movement at the edges of my vision. The next morning, the window is back to normal. Sunlight filters through the curtains, illuminating my cluttered bedroom. I laugh at myself, hollow and shaky, convincing myself it was all a dream, a waking hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But as I get dressed, something catches my eye. On the floor by the window lies a thin scrap of yellowed paper. My fingers hover before I finally pick it up, careful not to tear the fragile material. It's blank, save for a faint floral watermark pressed into its surface. I have no idea where it came from. I don't own anything like this. After staring at it for too long, I shove it into a drawer and leave for work, trying not to dwell on the implications. All day, I can't focus. I fumble through tasks, nodding through conversations, but my thoughts keep circling back to the veiled figures. When I finally drag myself home that evening, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep, I enter the bedroom with a sickening sense of dread. At first, the window looks normal. Relief washes over me like cool water. But as I sit on the edge of the bed, pulling off my shoes, I notice the glass darkening. My stomach flips as the familiar scene flickers back into view. The room is sharper this time, the details clearer in its sepia-tone gloom. The figures are closer. Not by much, but enough that I can see the pattern on one's dress, floral lace. The veil of another figure has grown thinner, revealing a pale mouth, slightly open, as if inhaling. The air grows heavy, pressing against my chest. I shout at them, my voice cracking under the strain. "What do you want?" The words hit the glass and dissolve into nothing. The figures remain silent, motionless, yet oppressively present. My fingers fumble at the latch. I pull, shake, and twist until my arms ache, but the window refuses to budge. In a panic, I grab a chair and wedge it under the handle. The act is absurd, I know it won't help, but the illusion of security is better than nothing. Then I rip an old blanket from the closet, using tape to seal it over the window. Out of sight, out of mind. But the silence that follows is worse. It's filled with the sound of my own pulse, the creak of wooden floorboards, and something soft rustling fabric from the other side of the glass. I lie awake all night, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every flicker of movement, every hollow gaze from that shadowy parlor. On Saturday, I decide to end it. I bring home a hammer, gripping it tightly as I stand before the window. The blanket comes down in a single, decisive rip. I stare at the figures, daring them to do something. They don't move, but they're closer. One stands just behind the glass, so near that I can almost see the eyes behind its veil, dark, steady, watching. Another figure has a gloved hand pressed lightly against the surface of their side of the window. My hands shake. I raise the hammer, ready to shatter the barrier between us. But then I freeze. What if breaking it lets them in? The thought paralyzes me. I can feel the truth of it deep in my gut. If I destroy the window, their world and mine will merge. They'll step through the gap, rearranging the air and my sanity in equal measure. I lower the hammer, my knees weak. Over the next few days, I try to pretend they aren't there. I drape towels, sheets, even a quilt over the window, but none of it erases the knowledge that they're waiting. I start sweating randomly, my palms damp whenever I enter the bedroom. I try sleeping on the couch, but the fear follows me. At night, I wake to phantom footsteps, the taste of metal on my tongue, and the sensation of invisible eyes pressing on my back. I leave a frantic voicemail for the landlord, no response. I vent to a co-worker, but he only shrugs and tells me to move. I consider it packing up, leaving the apartment for good, but the idea terrifies me. What if they follow? What if I can never escape them? By the fifth night, the figures are so close I can see every fold of their clothes, every ripple of their veils. One lifts a gloved hand as if to tap on the glass, but stops just short. I sit on the bed, trembling, and whisper to myself, "Don't open the window. Don't look too long, don't let them in." It's faint, yet unmistakable musty perfume laced with decay, sweet and rancid at once. My stomach clenches, and I gag, pressing my sleeve against my nose. It doesn't help. The scent seems to fill my head, twisting and lingering. The figures in the window are closer now, filling almost the entire frame. One gloved hand, delicate and covered in intricate black lace, rests flat against the glass. I can see the veins under the fragile skin of their wrists, faintly blue and horrifyingly human. My chest tightens as another figure tilts its head slowly, deliberately. I gasp, stumbling backward until I hit the edge of the bed. My breath comes in sharp, ragged bursts. They can move. The thought crashes into me like a wave, dizzying and cold. They can move. I grab the old quilt from the chair in the corner, along with a roll of tape, my fingers fumbling as I try to steady them. Working fast, I layer the fabric over the window, taping it down sloppily but securely. I add layer after layer, folding the edges over and pressing the tape tight against the frame. When I'm done, the glass is completely obscured, sealed, as much as I can manage. It's not enough. My chest heaves, and my hands are shaking as I shove the dresser against the window. It screeches along the wooden floor, heavy and unyielding, but I push until it's flush against the wall. Then I stack books, one by one, on top of the dresser, a makeshift barricade against something that shouldn't exist. I collapse onto the floor by the door, hugging my knees to my chest, my breath hitching with every exhale. The room feels suffocating, the silence pressing against my eardrums until it roars. I press my hands over my ears, as if that could stop the onslaught of panic flooding my system. Then, through the silence, I hear it. A faint, deliberate sound. Single quotes, scratch, dot, scratch, dot, scratch. It's the unmistakable whisper of lace dragging over glass, a delicate yet unnerving scrape that vibrates through the floor, into my skull. My breath catches, and I squeeze my eyes shut, pressing my palms harder against my ears. It doesn't help. The sound isn't outside me, it's everywhere, seeping into the marrow of my bones. I don't dare look. I sit there, paralyzed, caught in a standoff with something I can't fully see. They don't break in, they don't smash the glass or force the latch. They just wait, and I wait too. By the time morning comes, the sound stops. My muscles ache from hours of tension, and my throat is raw from breathing too hard for too long. Heart pounding, I shove the dresser aside, my body trembling with exhaustion. I peel away the quilt and tape, piece by piece, dreading what I might find. The window is normal, just the street outside, gray and overcast. My reflection stares back at me, pale and hollow-eyed, but otherwise ordinary. Relief floods through me, but it's short-lived. As I lean closer to inspect the glass, I catch a flicker of movement, a pale, veiled shape hovering just behind my image. I spin around, heart lurching into my throat. Nothing's there. Still, the feeling clings to me, sticky and cold. I press my hand against the glass, trying to convince myself it's solid, that I imagine the faint give beneath my fingertips. But as I touch it, the surface feels wrong, soft, almost pliable, as if my hand could slip through it into someplace else. I yank my hand back, breathing hard. There's no visible change, but I know what I felt. I should leave. But I don't. I spend the rest of the day pacing the small apartment, unable to focus on anything but the window. It looks normal now, but I know that can change. The veiled figures are burned into my mind, their silhouettes lingering even when I close my eyes. That night, I sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the glass. The reflection stares back, warped slightly by the angle of the light. Every so often, I think I see something, a faint shadow or ripple, but it's gone when I blink. I turn off the lights and lie in bed, the covers pulled up to my chin. I can't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint sigh of the wind outside sends my heart racing. The air feels heavier, damp and suffocating, and the faint scent of that musty perfume lingers. I tell myself I'm imagining it, but I know I'm not. When I close my eyes, I see the room behind the window as clearly as if I were standing inside it. The dim light, the stained wallpaper, the antique furniture, it's all waiting for me. I can feel the thinness of the boundary between us, a fragile pane of glass keeping their world from mine. I wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. They're faint, slow, deliberate. My throat tightens as I realize they're coming from behind the window. I don't look. I don't dare. But I know the figures are there, closer than ever. They didn't need to break in. They didn't need to speak or move violently. They've already won. They've shown me the other side. And I can feel it, the boundary weakening. One day, maybe soon, I'll wake up, and the window won't show my world anymore. I'll open my eyes and see their room, the veiled figures standing at my bedside. And this time, they won't stop at the glass. Barefoot. That night, I stumbled out of my cramped guest room, drawn by a strange scratching sound outside. I had been living there for 2 months, tending the overgrown rose bushes and cutting back ivy that clawed at the brickwork. It was a temporary job, offered by a distant acquaintance who knew I needed time and space to recover from the mess I'd made of my life. I still don't know why I accepted. Barefoot, I crept across the cold patio stones, my heart pounding in my ears. The moonlight warped everything, casting strange, shifting shadows at the edges of my vision. At the far end of the garden stood the statue. I had barely noticed it before. Its smooth, featureless oval where a face should have been. It looked like a project abandoned halfway through, a sculpture someone gave up on. But that night, it looked different. The stone surface appeared to hold faint contours, hints of a face struggling to emerge. I hesitated, rubbing my arms against a creeping chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Stepping closer, I strained to see in the pale moonlight. And then I realized it had a face, or rather, it was trying to have one. Indistinct features began surfacing, the furrowed brow of an old man, hollow cheeks, and a lip curled in disdain. My stomach turned. Blinking, I saw the features shift again, this time into the tear-streaked visage of a woman. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a shovel leaning against the shed. The statue didn't move while I watched directly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it might lean forward the moment I looked away. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Exhaustion from long days clearing dead leaves and paths must have taken its toll. My life before this job hopping, running from my own failures, had left me raw. Surely, I was imagining things. Yet, as the day went on, I couldn't ignore it. Passing the statue during my chores, I noticed subtle changes. Faint wrinkles on its forehead, the suggestion of a scar along a cheek. It was as though an invisible sculptor worked on it while I slept. By midday, its posture seemed different. It no longer faced the trellis at the garden's edge, but was angled slightly, almost as if watching the door I used to re-enter the house. Sweat trickled down my temples as I tried to dismiss the thought. Later, as the sun dipped and shadows stretched, I lingered in the living room, staring out the window. I found an old hand mirror in a drawer earlier that week and used it to check the statue indirectly. Holding my breath, I angled the mirror toward it, waiting to see movement. Nothing happened, yet its stance felt heavier, leaning forward just enough to unsettle me. That night, I slept fitfully. The room was stifling, filled with the musty scent of old wood and fabric. I woke several times, certain I'd heard footsteps on the patio stones. Once, I thought I heard a low scraping sound, like a hand brushing against the brick wall. The next morning, the statue's face had changed again. Its gaunt expression now had parted lips, as if silently calling to me. Along its jawline, I saw faint marks, tiny runes, or scars etched into the stone. Their meaning eluded me, but they filled me with unease. The sensation of being watched became constant. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the weather was causing cracks to form in odd patterns. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I considered covering it with a tarp, but hesitated. Something about the statue felt dangerous, as if provoking it might escalate its silent threat. A few nights later, I decided to confront it. I waited until dusk, the sky a deep bruise of purple, before venturing outside with a linen sheet. My legs trembled, and my palms were slick with sweat as I approached the statue. Its face or faces, because it never seemed settled, hovered somewhere between a scowl and a sneer. The way it leaned forward now felt unmistakable, its posture almost eager, as if trying to communicate something dreadful. My heart hammered in my chest, and I glanced around. The house behind me was dark and silent. I was completely alone. Taking a shallow breath, I lifted the sheet, trying to drape it over the statue's head and shoulders. My fingers brushed the stone, and I flinched. It was oddly warm, as if it had soaked in sunlight, though the air around it was cool. For a fleeting moment, I thought I felt the surface shift beneath my hand. I gasped, yanking my arm back, the sheet slipping to the ground. I stumbled over a rake, my skin prickling with unease. I tried again, but every instinct screamed that touching the statue directly was a mistake. That night, my dreams were a storm of half-formed nightmares. I woke repeatedly, heart pounding, certain I'd heard whispers at my window. The wind had picked up outside, branches scraping against the walls like fingernails on a chalkboard. I clutched the small mirror I'd found earlier, angling it to check the hallway behind me every time I ventured for water or stood near the bathroom door. I couldn't shake the feeling that the statue might appear just outside, pressing its cracked face against the glass. When morning came, I realized with a sinking dread that the statue had changed again. Its once smooth neck now bore grooves, veins bulging from the stone. Where its eyes had been empty hollows, there were now faint indentations, pupils forming in the shadowed sockets. My stomach churned, and heat prickled at the back of my neck. I couldn't eat. Just looking at it made my hands tremble and my body break into a cold sweat. It felt as though the statue knew something about me, as if it had been watching, cataloging every fear and weakness, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal something I couldn't face. I spent hours locked in the house, rifling through the dusty papers I'd found in an old chest by the stairs. Most of it was mundane receipts, letters with faded ink, inventories of garden tools from decades ago. But one letter mentioned the statue. The gardener insists the old figure predates the house itself. He believes it changes, but I have not witnessed this myself. My pulse quickened as I slammed the drawer shut. I wasn't the first to notice, and that realization tightened my throat. If others had experienced this, why had they left? There were no solutions, no instructions. As night fell again, I felt cornered. My heart pounded relentlessly, and every creak of the floorboards or snap of a distant branch made me flinch. I debated leaving, but I had nowhere else to go. Instead, I resolved to confront the statue directly. Armed with my flashlight and the mirror tucked in my pocket, I stepped outside. The air was heavy, charged like it always was before a thunderstorm. The statue's face was unmistakably human now, yet its features shifted constantly, An old man's weariness, a woman's anguish, a mask of pain and rage. It leaned so far forward I half expected it to topple. My legs shook as sweat trickled down my spine. Lifting the flashlight, I aimed the beam at its face. For a moment, it remained still. Then I saw it, a subtle twitch, a faint movement, as though it was preparing to speak. My throat tightened, and I fumbled for the mirror, angling it so I wouldn't have to meet its gaze directly. In the warped reflection, I saw the stone lips part. There was no voice, only a dry rasp like stone grinding against stone. My heartbeat roared in my ears as the statue seemed to lean even closer, tracking my movements. I grabbed the linen sheet, flinging it over the statue's head. This time, it stayed. Beneath the fabric, the outline of a face pressed outward, its features straining against the cloth as if trying to break free. Dizzy and nauseated, I stumbled back. The air felt too thick to breathe, and bile rose in my throat. Suddenly, the sheet slipped off, drifting to the ground as if moved by unseen hands. The statue stood bare again, its face briefly smooth and featureless, as if mocking me. Then, slowly, it formed a new expression, my own. Tears blurred my vision as I staggered inside, slamming the door behind me. I collapsed against the wall, sweat soaking through my shirt. In the small hallway mirror near the coat rack, I thought I caught movement behind me. Spinning around, I saw nothing, yet my reflection looked different. My eyes were darker, the skin beneath them bruised, my face thinner and haunted. By dawn, I hadn't slept. The windows rattled softly in the breeze, but the statue remained a still silhouette against the pale morning sky. Its shadow lingered, even when I wasn't looking. I couldn't tell if the statue had moved again, but the unease it left behind churned in my stomach. My mind spiraled as I thought about the future. I'll leave soon, I told myself, maybe tomorrow. This job wasn't worth my sanity. But as I turned away, something caught my eye. In the hallway mirror, I saw the statue's reflection, impossibly close to the house, right beneath the window. It leaned in, its featureless face nearly pressing against the glass. My heart jolted. I spun around to look outside, but it was back in its original spot at the garden's edge. Still, the reflection burned in my mind, like an image seared onto film. Now, I can't find rest. My eyes play tricks on me, and every reflective surface becomes a source of dread. The glass panes, the steel doorknob, even the small hand mirror I keep nearby. Every time I glance, I think I see its face behind mine, carved in impossible detail, its scars, its shifting eyes. I know the danger hasn't passed. It's learned something about me, and it isn't done. Every reflection, every fleeting glance over my shoulder whispers the same thing. It's waiting, and it's closer than ever. Quiet house. They remained fixed at exactly 3 o'clock. Their stillness felt mocking. The air in the study was stale, thick with the smell of old varnish and dust. The dark wooden walls seemed to press inward, the silence dense and suffocating. I thought about the day I moved in, inheriting this creaking old house after my grandfather passed. I'd always found it eerie, but I never expected anything like this. I turned the watch over in my hand. Its ornate casing bore strange geometric patterns etched into the metal circles, triangles, and interlocking lines I couldn't decipher. Pressing the small button at the top, I expected the cover to pop open smoothly. It stuck for a moment before giving way with a sharp click. Inside, the watch face gleamed like a silver mirror, reflecting my distorted image beneath its motionless hands. My stomach twisted at the sight. The room's temperature dropped abruptly, and my breath misted in the still air. Then I heard it, a whisper. Faint, almost too soft to hear, it slid under the threshold of my senses like a blade. My heart stuttered, and I glanced around the study. The desk, stacked with yellowed papers, the musty chair, the shelves of forgotten books, nothing else. Yet the whisper lingered, a syllable of something dark and distant. I stepped back into the hallway, fumbling for the light switch. The lamp flickered weakly, casting jittery shadows on the peeling wallpaper. My pulse hammered in my ears as a cold sweat formed on my brow. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, but what could I do? This house was my home now, at least for the night. Leaving at this hour seemed impossible. I snapped the watch shut, hoping to break the tension. The air warmed slightly, or maybe it was just my imagination. Deciding I needed to clear my head, I walked toward the living room to sit and gather my thoughts. But as I stepped through the doorway, I stumbled. My vision blurred, and suddenly I was standing in front of the cold, dark TV set. I blinked, disoriented. How had I crossed the room so quickly? My stomach twisted with unease as I glanced at the wall clock. 9:12 p.m. I checked my phone. 9:14 p.m. Close enough, I thought, swallowing hard. Pressing the pocket watch between my palms, I tried to steady my nerves. Its hands still refused to move, frozen at 3 o'clock. I sat on the sofa, forcing myself to breathe slowly. In or out, but my lungs felt tight, the air thick and heavy. The silence pressed down until a faint creak of floorboards broke it. My heart raced. The sound came from overhead. I knew no one was upstairs. The attic was empty, filled with nothing but forgotten junk and old boxes. Yet the footsteps continued, deliberate and soft. Determined to prove myself wrong, I set the watch on the coffee table and climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, my throat dry and my palms clammy. The attic door loomed at the end of the hallway, its chipped paint glowing faintly in the dim light. Reaching for the knob, I hesitated. It felt icy beneath my hand. I turned it slowly, the hinges groaning as I pushed the door open. The attic smelled of mold and varnish, dust motes swirling in the faint glow of the hallway light. I pulled the chain of the bare bulb hanging from the rafters. It flickered, but stayed on. Boxes, trunks, and old tools sat in silent disarray. No one was there, of course. I strained my ears, but heard nothing beyond the rhythm of my own pulse. My breath came in shallow bursts as I turned to leave. That's when I saw it. A small, leather-bound notebook lay half-hidden behind a wooden crate. I picked up the notebook, its cover marked with the same strange symbol as the watch. The familiar geometric patterns were etched into the leather, interlocking circles and lines I didn't understand. Flipping through its pages, I found words scrawled in my grandfather's neat handwriting. Stolen time, cycles, trapped in 3, watch demands. My chest tightened. I snapped the notebook shut. The attic bulb flickered violently, and I felt the world tilt around me. The dim light plunged into darkness before flaring painfully bright again. Staggering, I leaned against a trunk to regain my balance. When I stumbled back into the hallway and checked my phone, it was 10:25 p.m., yet I felt like I'd only spent a few minutes upstairs. Back in the living room, I found the watch exactly where I'd left it, but my arms felt heavy, almost numb. Rolling up my sleeves, I froze. Shallow geometric lines were etched into my skin, mirroring the patterns on the watch. They didn't hurt or bleed, they were just there. Panic surged as I tried rubbing them away, but they wouldn't fade. I bolted to the bathroom, flicking on the light. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, clammy, exhausted. Splashing water on my face, I tried to shake off the creeping dread. That's when I saw it, near my elbow. The patterns had grown more intricate. A small, wheel-like design now circled my arm, a shape that hadn't been there moments before. I pressed my fingers to it, but it was numb, without sensation. From the hallway came a faint, rasping whisper. My heart leapt. I rushed out, leaving wet footprints on the floor. The watch seemed heavier now, pulsing with an almost malevolent energy, as if feeding on my fear. I grabbed my phone, but its battery, nearly full earlier, had drained inexplicably. I tried to make a call, but it wouldn't connect. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the glass. Yet there was no moonlight, no stars, just an impenetrable, moonless blackness. I spent what felt like an hour pacing, trying to make sense of it all. I heated water for tea, only to find the kettle cold again when I reached for it. Time itself felt slippery. One moment I was lighting a candle in the kitchen. The next I was standing in the hallway. The candle melted halfway down, hot wax dripping onto my hand without pain. Every glance at the watch revealed the same frozen time, 3 o'clock. Each attempt to open it was met with hesitation. dread pooling in my stomach. Still, I needed answers. Eventually, I returned to the study. The notebook lay beside me as I forced the watch open again. Its small door creaked. Inside, I saw my reflection, distorted and pale, eyes wide with fear. But behind my reflection loomed another face, angular, hollow, with eyes like the pointed hands of a clock. I gasped and slammed the watch shut, my chest heaving. The desk lamp flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. In that black void, the whispers intensified, slipping beneath my thoughts like an insidious hum. The air turned icy, my breaths misting before me. When the light sputtered back on, I found the watch clutched in my trembling hands. The patterns on my arms had spread across my shoulders, delicate but alien lines trailing toward my collarbone. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced it down. Desperation gripped me. I had to destroy the watch. I retrieved my grandfather's old hammer from a kitchen drawer. Placing the watch on the dining table, I raised the hammer high. But as the hammer's head swung down, the lights died again. In the darkness, something cold and unyielding wrapped around my wrist, freezing me in place. When the light returned, I stood empty-handed. The watch had vanished, and the hammer lay forgotten on the floor. My arms were now completely covered in patterns beautifully intricate, terrifyingly alien. Breathing hard, I stumbled back to the study. The notebook was open, though I didn't remember leaving it that way. My eyes fell on a single phrase: to escape its cycle, face the reflection, and deny its claim. I saw my face, twisted with fear, and behind it, faint but undeniable, the other presence. It loomed like a shadow trapped behind the glass, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "You can't have my time," I whispered, my voice trembling. The air thickened, and a surge of static jolted through my body. My muscles tensed, and tears pricked my eyes. Louder now, I repeated, "You can't have my time." The lights flickered madly, nausea rolling over me in waves. And then it stopped. The room stilled, the lamp glowing steadily again. My breath came in ragged gasps as the cold receded, warmth returning to the air. The watch still read 3 o'clock, but the patterns on my arms had begun to fade just slightly. For the first time, I felt like I might have broken the cycle. But even as the lines on my skin blurred, I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching, biding its time. I closed the watch and set it down on the desk, my breaths coming hard and shallow. My legs trembled as I staggered into the hallway. Reaching for the front door latch, I twisted it, expecting resistance. This time, it gave way. A rush of cold night air met me as I stepped onto the porch, greedily inhaling the fresh air. But something still felt wrong. Before leaving, I glanced back through the study window, where the watch lay. Its surface reflected faintly in the dim light, and for a single, terrible moment, I thought I saw the hollow-eyed figure again. It hovered behind my reflection, a thin, knowing smile on its face, as if bidding its time. My skin crawled, and my heart pounded. Though the patterns on my arms were fading, faint lines remained, etched permanently into my flesh. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. The watch was still in there, frozen at 3 o'clock, waiting. As I pulled the door shut behind me, I felt a lingering chill burrow beneath my skin, a reminder that whatever lived inside that cursed timepiece had no intention of letting me escape forever. The bells of the forgotten village. I still remember the chill that ran through me. It was late afternoon, and I had spent the entire day alone in the cramped basement, trying to turn the old storage space into a workshop. The flickering overhead bulb cast uneven light as I stripped away rotten panels and scraped layers of peeling paint. Sweat trickled down my face. My hands were caked with dust, and my clothes carried the heavy odor of damp earth and mold. In a corner beneath a protruding beam, I noticed a narrow crack running through the old concrete wall. At first, it seemed harmless, just a slender fault in the rough surface, but when I ran my fingers over it, a sudden, impossibly cold breeze hit me sharp, like air escaping a freezer. The hairs on my arms stood on end, Curious and uneasy, I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the concrete. That's when I heard a muffled, low voice murmuring my name. I jerked back, heart racing. The voice was deliberate, drawing out each syllable as if savoring them. I turned off my tools and listened, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The only other sounds were the soft hum of the furnace and faint traffic through the small basement window. But the voice came again, softer now, as if retreating into the wall, whispering secrets only I would know, details about my past, moments I hadn't shared with anyone. Sweat trickled down my neck, and I felt my mouth go dry. I rationalized that it must be a trick of the acoustics or old pipes carrying echoes from elsewhere in the house. This place had always felt odd since I inherited it from my reclusive aunt, who I barely knew. The basement had a history, rumored to have been a shelter, but I never cared to investigate further. The voice didn't stop. It hinted at things to come, future events, like an approaching storm or an unexpected midnight visitor. Sometimes, it mimicked my voice so perfectly that I couldn't tell if the words were coming from my own mind. Terrified, I fled upstairs, gulping down water in the kitchen as I tried to calm my racing heart. Determined to end this, I decided to seal the crack. Armed with filler and tools, I returned to the basement, but the atmosphere had changed. The air was stifling, and the space felt unnervingly tight. Kneeling by the crack, I shone my flashlight inside and caught a faint glimmer of sheen deep within the fissure that resembled polished metal or wet stone. I pressed filler into the gap, determined to lock away whatever lay behind it. Instantly, the voice rose in protest, louder now, mocking me in my own tone, repeating my private thoughts and self-doubts. My hands trembled as a sudden icy gust blew through the crack, cutting through my shirt and leaving me gasping. Panicked, I abandoned the task, leaving the job unfinished. That night, I dreamed of faceless figures moving silently through my hallway. Their smooth, egg-like heads were featureless, and they hovered near my bed, reaching out with long, jointless fingers. I woke up in a cold sweat, unable to shake the oppressive feeling that the crack and the voice within it held something far more sinister than I could comprehend. I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest tight, and the clock read 3 a.m. I could still feel phantom fingertips brushing against my skin. Unable to sleep, I paced the living room until dawn, thoughts of the voice from the crack consuming me. The house's oppressive silence weighed on me, and I realized I hadn't felt at ease since starting work in the basement. The next day, I tried another approach. I dragged an old shelf to block the crack, hoping out of sight meant out of mind. But as soon as it was covered, I felt a heavy pressure at the base of my skull. The voice returned, muffled yet relentless, revealing unsettling details about people I once knew and moments I regretted. It also foretold eerie events, tools rusting, a burst pipe upstairs, and a letter bearing bad news. Its tone was steady and unnervingly confident. I tried to distract myself with chores, repairing stairs, checking the fuse box, clearing cobwebs, but the voice seeped into my thoughts. Sometimes it was so subtle I mistook it for my own internal monologue. Other times it sang my name mockingly, echoing through my mind. While cleaning, I stumbled upon an old ledger. Inside were shaky notes from my late aunt about a sealed door in the basement wall, left by the previous owner. One cryptic line chilled me. "It's not trying to kill, it's trying to become." I slammed the book shut, heart racing. That evening, I reached out to a friend, hoping to confide, but my calls wouldn't go through. Even texting failed, leaving me alone with my spiraling fears. When I glimpsed myself in the hallway mirror, I thought, for a fleeting moment, my reflection's lips moved while mine did not. The sight nearly sent me screaming. Determined to confront the source, I returned to the basement with a flashlight and hammer, widening the crack enough to peer inside. My beam reflected off a smooth, warped surface deep in the cavity, like an ancient, tarnished mirror. I saw the faint outline of my own eye staring back, distorted and unnatural. The voice grew louder, whispering my name as the temperature dropped. It wasn't violent, but invasive, threading itself into my thoughts. Panicking, I hammered a wooden board over the crack. The voice wailed, reverberating not in the air but in my skull. My fingers went numb, and icy air clawed at my throat. I faced a decision: leave this house, my last refuge, or confront the force behind the wall. I chose to fight. I spent the night sealing the crack completely, using cement, metal mesh, and paint. The voice fought back, hissing my failures and past mistakes in cruel detail, but I pushed on. By morning, it was gone. Only a faint line remained beneath fresh paint. The basement felt warmer, quieter. Exhausted, I slumped onto a stool, hoping it was over. For a week, everything seemed normal. The voice had faded into a faint murmur, almost like a trick of memory. I avoided the basement, but couldn't shake the sense of a lingering chill. My dreams were still haunted by faceless figures, but they felt distant, like echoes fading into the background. I allowed myself to believe the ordeal was behind me. Then, yesterday, the unease returned. While checking for moisture in the basement, I noticed something in a shiny patch of the floor where a puddle had dried. My reflection stared back, but its lips moved, parting slowly while mine stayed shut. Its head tilted slightly, and behind its shoulder, I glimpsed the faint outline of a featureless, watchful face. The temperature plummeted. My heart thundered as I stumbled back, unable to tear my eyes away until I caught myself against the railing. The reflection's lips moved again, silently forming my name. Now I sit here, trembling, the door locked behind me. The pressure in my head hums like a distant whisper. Dust coats my tongue, and every reflective surface feels like a trap. I've covered the bathroom mirror with a towel, terrified of what I might see. I can feel its presence within me, not fully formed but growing stronger, waiting in the shadows of my thoughts. I've closed the crack in the wall, but I can't shake the feeling that I've merely given it a new place to dwell. When I stand in front of the kitchen window at dusk, I sometimes catch my reflection grinning a twisted, out-of-sync expression or silently mouthing words I can't quite hear. In the stillness that follows, there's always a faint murmur, just below the edge of perception, calling my name. It's a constant reminder that, no matter what I've done, this nightmare isn't truly over. I can't say how long I've been wandering in this cursed mist, but it's far too long. My throat is raw from the cold, damp air, and my skin feels clammy under my jacket. When I left the trail just a few hours ago or so, I think the forest was quiet and serene. I'd planned a simple weekend hike, reach the summit, enjoy the view, and return before sunset. Now, nothing looks familiar. Even the trees seem distorted, their shapes warped by the swirling white haze. The mist is everywhere, thicker than I've ever seen. It moves lazily, without a breeze, and carries a faint, stale odor, like air trapped in an old chest. The smell churns my stomach, and my nostrils flare at the unpleasant tang. My eyes sting, and if I stand still for too long, a strange dizziness overtakes me, as though the ground beneath me is tilting. I swear it feels like walking on an unstable platform. I try to focus on a nearby tree trunk, each step sinking into damp leaves and soil. My heart pounds, weighed down by a persistent sense of dread. Something is wrong, very wrong. I pull out my compass again. The needle spins aimlessly, refusing to settle. My GPS, fully charged when I started, won't even turn on now. It's as if the mist has drained the life from everything electronic. Frustrated, I shake the device, muttering curses under my breath, but it's useless. Reaching the tree, I lean against it, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Through the fog, I see something, a faint outline of a figure, no more than a dozen feet away. I freeze, my heart hammering. I don't call out. Instead, I watch. The shape is tall and thin, hunched slightly forward, its edges shimmering and breaking apart as the mist consumes it. Then it's gone. I blink, unsure if I truly saw anything. It's not the first time. Human-like forms seem to emerge and dissolve in the fog, as if the mist itself is painting and erasing them at will. They vanish before I can confirm they're real. My legs tremble, but I push forward, desperate for the mist to clear. Instead, I find a small cabin, old and weathered, with gray planks and a sagging roof. It doesn't belong here, it wasn't on any map. Still, it's the only shelter I've seen. I step inside, the creaky door groaning under my weight. The light filtering through grimy windows is dim, and the air smells of mold and rot. My boots scrape across warped floorboards, stirring the stale scent. A chair lies toppled, and a table leans awkwardly against the wall. I lean against the cabin's interior, my breath uneven, fingertips numb. The space offers an odd sense of comfort, but something about it feels deeply unsettling. I set down my backpack and check my supplies, water, some food enough to last the night if I'm careful. Wiping the sweat from my forehead, I try to focus. Just this morning, I was full of optimism, ready to escape the noise of the city and enjoy the mountains. Now, I regret every step that brought me here. My attention falls on a mirror nailed to the far wall. Its chipped frame surrounds a dusty, murky surface. As I approach, I can't make out my face, only a shadowy silhouette. Raising a shaky hand, I wipe the glass with my sleeve. The reflection sharpens just enough for me to see something pale drifting behind me, outside the window. I whirl around nothing. When I look back, my own frightened expression stares out from the mirror, the dim cabin surrounding me. On a shelf, I find papers curled, faded, and weathered. They appear to be journal entries or notes. Phrases jump out at me: fog, impossible readings. Compass spinning, voices at night. My stomach sinks. Someone else was trapped here, but there's no sign of how they escaped or if they ever did. The handwriting becomes frantic, the letters slanted and smudged. No dates, no name, just scattered observations and complaints. Then I hear a low hum outside, soft yet insistent. It's not the wind. There's no rustling leaves or moving branches. The sound swells, rhythmic and steady, more like voices in a distant chant. Pressing my ear to the door, I hear the hum rise and fall, as though beckoning me back into the mist. My skin prickles at the thought. The strange shapes I've seen haven't attacked me, but they linger, just out of reach. It's as if they want me to wander, to lose myself entirely. I sit on the floor, knees drawn to my chest, trying to calm my breathing. I need a plan. With my compass and GPS useless, I'll follow the slope of the land downhill that should lead to the foothills where my rental cabin and car are waiting. I still have energy bars, a whistle, and my flashlight. For now, it works. But the mist feels alive, patient, and I know it's waiting for me to make a mistake. I click the flashlight back on, its beam slicing through the dim cabin. It lands on the mirror again. For a split second, I see movement within, like someone passing behind me. My heart leaps as I swing the light around wildly, but there's nothing, just broken furniture and old wood. The cabin feels oppressive, its walls closing in on me. My breathing is shallow. I grab my bag and bolt outside. The mist wraps around me immediately, damp and suffocating. The humming voices are quieter now, but persistent, distant yet constant. I pick a direction downhill and move cautiously. The undergrowth grabs at my ankles, and I slip on wet leaves, catching myself on low branches. My heart pounds in my chest, and I feel like the forest is alive, watching. To my right, a tall, featureless shape materializes, impossibly still. I shine the flashlight on it, and it vanishes, melting into the fog. I stagger backward, nearly dropping the light. The chanting grows louder again, surrounding me, its source impossible to pinpoint. My vision blurs, nausea rising as the mist clings to my face and eyelashes. My body alternates between sweating and shivering. My ears pop, and I shake my head to clear the dizziness. Still, I press on, each step deliberate, though I feel like I'm sinking. After stumbling over a fallen log, I decide to rest. My muscles ache, my limbs heavy. Tilting my head upward offers no comfort. There's no sky, only endless whiteness. Then I turn around somewhere, the chanting fades to silence, leaving me feeling like I'm adrift in a void. I bite my lip until I taste blood, using the pain to stay grounded. Desperate, I rummage in my bag for my whistle and blow it twice. The sharp sound cuts through the air, but is swallowed quickly by the fog, returning as a weak echo. No reply. I close my eyes, trying to remember the map. The rental cabin where I began was only 2 hours from the main road. and I know the trail was well marked. If I can find the river, I should be able to navigate back. But my compass spins aimlessly, and my GPS remains lifeless. Suddenly, footsteps echo behind me. I leap to my feet, heart racing, flashlight trembling in my grip. I whip it around, illuminating nothing but swirling mist. Still, I feel it's something ancient, passing by, unseen. The hair on my neck stands on end, and I think about the journal pages in the cabin. They spoke of voices, distorted readings, and impossible phenomena. What if this fog isn't natural? What if it's something old, something that's always been here, luring travelers off the path to wander endlessly? It doesn't kill, it traps you in panic and confusion until you're lost forever. The thought chills me, but I refuse to give in. I grit my teeth and force myself to move. The ground slopes slightly downward, so I follow the incline, repeating under my breath, "Keep moving, keep moving." My voice cracks. Shapes continue to appear in the corners of my vision, human-like figures that vanish when I try to focus on them. I stop looking directly, knowing they want me to panic, to lose my way entirely. The flashlight dims, and my throat tightens as I quicken my pace. The mist presses closer, heavy on my eyes, until I remember the mirror in the cabin. The reflection, the vague figure standing behind me. What if it wasn't just outside? What if it's inside me now? A sharp pain shoots through my chest, and I gasp, stumbling forward. The chanting returns, louder, a haunting choir calling my name. They want me to listen, to stop, and turn back toward the heart of the fog. My teeth chatter, and I scream, "Leave me alone." The words feel hollow, muffled by the mist. The chanting fractures into whispers, echoing in my own mind. My palms sweat, and I swat at the air, nearly dropping my bag. I keep moving, though I'm sure I've been walking in circles. The cabin could be behind me, or ahead, or gone entirely. Time blurs as I press on, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. Then, I see it, a faint thinning in the mist, just ahead. It's subtle, but the air seems lighter, clearer. Desperation fuels me as I lurch toward the break, pushing through branches that claw at my coat. My breathing is ragged, my legs unsteady. The whiteness lifts slightly, revealing a slope I think I recognize. A glimmer of hope flares. This could be near where I started. The rock formations look familiar, though I can't be certain. Checking my compass again, I notice the needle still spins, but slower now. I try my phone, it beeps faintly, no signal, but it's not completely dead. I exhale, trembling, trying to steady myself. The chanting fades behind me, but it doesn't vanish. I can still feel it on the back of my neck, a lingering presence. They're not gone, they're just letting me believe I'm safe. After another 10 minutes of trudging through the mist, I spot a fallen pine I'd passed early that morning. Relief floods through me. I'm finally nearing the edge. My head still pounds, but the dizziness eases, and I quicken my pace, heading in what I hope is the right direction. Behind me, I hear something faint, like the echo of my whistle, as if someone else is blowing it. I refuse to look back. When I finally break free of the densest part of the mist, I collapse near a large boulder. The world feels different. There's color again. The green of moss and brown earth seem vivid after the oppressive whiteness. Though tendrils of fog still linger at the edges of my vision, I want to both laugh and cry. My body aches, my clothes are soaked in sweat, and my breaths come in ragged gasps. I check my phone's screen. The battery icon flickers to life, weak but present. My compass wobbles, as if trying to reorient itself. I'm not safe yet, but I'm closer. As I stand and take a few cautious steps forward, I glance at my watch. The reflective glass catches my eye. For an instant, I see my pale, haunted face and something else. At the corner of the reflection, a faint outline shifts among the trees. My heart stops, and I jerk my arm away, breathing hard. When I look again, the shape is gone, but the unease remains. I know it's still there, clinging to me. Even out of the mist, its presence lingers, lurking in reflections and shadows. As I limp downhill, I glance over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting the whispers to start again. Though I've escaped the worst of the mist, its touch feels permanent. A stain deep inside me. I know I'll never trust my compass the same way again. I know I'll always fear mirrors, watching for flickers of movement in their depths. The mist doesn't kill, it doesn't have to. It only needs you to remember it, to carry its presence with you. And I will. I'll never forget. I had come to the hotel alone. There would be no one to help me when morning came. The footsteps outside my room ceased for the moment, and I hurried downstairs to confront the receptionist. "Is there anyone else on my floor?" I demanded. He gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile. "No, sir, you have the entire floor to yourself." That afternoon, I removed the chair from beneath the doorknob and opened the door abruptly, hoping to catch someone in the act. The hallway was empty. Frustrated, I tried recording the sounds with my phone, but all it captured was faint creaking. I wandered the corridor, running my fingers along the dusty frames of the antique mirrors. Stopping before the largest mirror near the staircase, I stared at my reflection. My pale face and bloodshot eyes stared back, hair damp with sweat. Something flickered at the edge of my vision, a shape drifting behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The mirror's surface seemed to ripple, or perhaps it was my nerves playing tricks. By the third night, my exhaustion was palpable. The pacing outside my door resumed, followed by the doorknob turning softly at first, then more insistently. I barricaded the door with my luggage, but I could still hear scraping noises and faint whispers. Pressing my ear to the wood, I caught a sound like slow, raspy breathing. I retreated to the bed, shaking uncontrollably. Shadows seemed to thicken, spreading across the walls like ink. The air turned stale, heavy with a scent like old, forgotten places. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched pressed down on me. And then the footsteps began inside the room, circling my bed. I reached for the lamp, but it wouldn't turn on. Something heavy pressed on my shoulders, holding me in place. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. Yet on the far wall, a shadow stretched unnaturally tall, its head tilting just as in the old photograph I'd found earlier. Desperate, I whispered, "Leave me alone," my voice breaking. There was no response, only silence waited with an unnatural patience, as if the presence was waiting for me to break. Near dawn, delirious and sleep-deprived, I tore through the dresser drawers and found an old letterhead from the hotel's early days. Written in careful cursive was a guest's note: "I cannot leave this room." He walks the halls every night, and when I look in the mirror, I see him behind me. My stomach churned. This had happened before decades ago. The realization struck me. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted me trapped in fear, night after night, endlessly reliving the terror. In a final act of defiance, I ripped the sheet from the covered mirror in the corridor and stared into it. My reflection stared back, but not alone. Behind me, a tall, distorted silhouette leaned forward, its elongated fingers hovering near my shoulder. I blinked, and the hallway was empty again, but I knew it was there. Always waiting, I stumbled back into my room, slamming the door and bracing against it. When morning light finally seeped in, I felt drained, as though I had spent the entire night running. Determined to leave, I packed quickly, ignoring the tingling sensation at the back of my neck. As I reached the door, the knob resisted, groaning as I pulled it open. The hallway stood silent and still. Dragging my suitcase, I made my way to the elevator. In the old mirror beside the doors, I saw my haggard reflection. I looked like a man broken by sleepless nights of terror, but as I adjusted my collar in the glass, I froze. My reflection's eyes were darker, its posture slightly off. Behind it, a familiar tall outline lingered at the edge of sight. My stomach dropped. With a ding, the elevator arrived. Before stepping in, I glanced back at the mirror. My reflection smiled faintly, an expression I hadn't made. My legs faltered, nearly toppling my suitcase. As the doors closed behind me, I could still hear it, the steady pacing footsteps echoing faintly in my ears. They followed me, unwilling to let me go. I left the building soon after, but even as I walked away, an odd tension lingered in my muscles. My shoulders felt stiff, as though they carried a weight I couldn't shrug off. Passing a storefront, I glanced at my reflection in the glass and froze. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow behind me, impossibly tall and looming. When I looked again, it was gone. Yet now, I can never be sure. Maybe I carried that presence with me, locked inside my own fearful mind. Maybe I will always feel the subtle pressure of a turning doorknob, hear the faint pacing of unseen footsteps, and catch the distorted shape in every reflection, waiting to be noticed once more. Village and Belle's story. My knuckles ache from gripping the steering wheel too hard, and the rental car's headlights barely pierce the suffocating darkness around me. The road beneath has devolved from asphalt to cracked gravel. My GPS lost signal nearly an hour ago, and there's no sign of streetlights or familiar landmarks. Just a lonely stretch of night, the occasional silhouette of leaning wooden fences on either side, and my own shallow breaths. The fences seem to press in, their angles tilted as though trying to whisper secrets through the windows. This trip wasn't supposed to be like this. I'm here on business, a contract negotiation in some forgotten factory town. I promised my family I'd return by the weekend, but now it's well past midnight, and I'm nowhere near the main highway. The oppressive night feels like it's closing in on me, and though the air is cool, sweat beads on my temple. I should have stopped at a motel hours ago, but my stubbornness convinced me to press on. A mistake. Every instinct screams that something's wrong. I ease off the gas, straining to see beyond the reach of my headlights. Then, up ahead, the faint outline of buildings emerges, weathered rooftops and leaning chimneys against a moonless sky. I pull over, killing the engine. The silence is immediate, the kind that swallows all sound, even my breathing. Gravel crunches beneath my shoes as I step out. "Hello," I call out, my voice hollow, absorbed by the night. No response. The settlement is larger than a single farmhouse. It might have been a village once. Boarded windows, sagging porches, and peeling paint tell of abandonment. I push open a rusty gate that squeals in protest, stepping into what could have been a town square. My flashlight flickers across furniture left to decay, a lace-draped table, a sofa with torn upholstery. Opposite me hangs an oval mirror, its cracked frame clinging to a darkened surface. I avert my gaze, unwilling to look at my reflection here. The air is thick, carrying a stale smell of rot and mildew. Each step stirs dust motes that swirl in my flashlight's beam. "Anyone here?" I try again, my voice small in the cavernous silence. Still nothing. Then I hear it, a bell, faint and distant. I freeze. Another chime follows, softer and higher pitched. The sound drifts from somewhere further down the street. My pulse quickens as I follow the sound. Around a corner, I find a tall wooden post with a frayed rope holding a bell that sways gently in the still air. There's no wind, no mechanism to move it, yet it rings a soft, almost kind tone. But each note sends a chill up my spine. Ahead, more bells come into view, one perched atop a chimney, another dangling from a window latch, a third beneath a porch roof. Each bell rings in turn, their tones forming a dissonant, ghostly choir. The sounds feel deliberate, almost as though they're communicating. My stomach tightens, my skin prickling with unease. I know these bells are talking about me. I pick a larger building, a two-story structure with a crooked sign that might once have read Draper's Shop. The door groans open, and I step inside. The air is damp and heavy. Broken shelves and scattered objects lie in disarray. On a counter, I find an old ledger. Its pages are brittle, covered in cramped handwriting. The entries list dates from decades past, stopping abruptly with no explanation, no farewell or record of evacuation. Just blank pages, after a final scribble. My flashlight shakes in my grip as the bells outside continue their haunting chorus. I move to a back room, where a cot sits untouched. Exhaustion pulls at me, but the air feels charged, as though I'm not alone. I sit with my back against a damp wall, my legs trembling, hands unsteady as I sip from my water bottle. My throat is dry, and every swallow feels like gravel. The thought of leaving gnaws at me. I could try to find my way back to the car, drive until I'm free of this place. But I'm not even sure I can navigate the maze of cracked roads. And the bells, they pull at me, their mystery anchoring me here, as if I have to understand them before I can leave. Forcing myself back outside, I glance at my watch. It's almost 2 a.m. The moon hangs as a thin crescent, casting faint light on sagging rooftops. The bells are quieter now, but their voices seem scattered, hidden behind closed doors, nestled in chimneys, or perched on forgotten lamp posts without lamps. They feel omnipresent, embedded in every shadowed corner. As I pass another crumbling house, a sudden gust of wind kicks up dust, stinging my eyes. I rub them, coughing, and when my vision clears, I notice a tall standing mirror through a half-open door. Its heavy wooden frame is carved with twisting vines, far more intricate than the first mirror I saw. Something about it draws me in. I step inside, my flashlight jittering over dusty furniture. The mirror's surface is darkened, smudged with grime, but I can see the faint outline of my silhouette. Slowly, I approach, raising a trembling hand to wipe away a patch of dirt. My reflection stares back, wide-eyed and uncertain. Then, a single bell chimes, soft, warm, almost a whisper. I spin around, flashlight sweeping the empty room, but there's no one there. The bell rings again, this time from above. I move cautiously into a side room, a kitchen, perhaps, and find a tiny bell hanging from the corner of a cabinet. It's so small I'm shocked I even noticed it. Yet its sound is sharp and clear, like a gentle tap on glass. Suddenly, other bells join in, their tones overlapping in a strange harmony that feels almost conversational. My heart races as I backpedal toward the mirror. In its reflection, I see myself, and something else. For a fleeting second, a figure looms behind me, a shape with hollow eyes. I whirl around, but the room is empty. My skin crawls, exhaustion weighs heavy, and my thoughts grow tangled. The bells sound almost like they're shaping words, my name whispered in haunting, fractured tones. Ya son. Ya son. I gasp for air, sweat running down my back, and stumble out onto the street. In my haste, I trip over a broken step, falling hard and scraping my palms. Pain anchors me briefly, but above, the sky seems to press closer, the silence between each bell's chime thick and suffocating. I push myself up and start walking, then running, the bells ringing faster now, not frantic, but in a rhythm I can't comprehend. Turning a corner, I nearly crash into another bell, this one tied to a rusted pitchfork planted in the ground. I dart into what looks like a general store, desperate for relief, hoping to find something to block my ears. Inside, I grab a dusty apron from a stack, wrapping it around my head in a clumsy attempt to muffle the sound. My breath comes in gasps as I glance at my reflection in the window. The apron looks absurd, but something else catches my eye, the warped reflection of the door behind me. In the distortion, I see a pair of eyes that aren't mine, staring back. My pulse spikes as I spin around, but the door is just a door, plain and solid. A deep, resonant clang reverberates through the air, coming from the village square. Compelled by a mix of terror and curiosity, I follow it. At the center of the square stands a tall pole with a massive bell at its peak, weathered and ancient, perhaps a church bell. I approach, legs shaking, and sense movement behind me. Turning quickly, I find only darkness, but the sensation of being watched lingers. The smaller bells chime again, their tones slower now, layered into a low hum that resonates in my chest like a second heartbeat. Invisible eyes seem to watch from behind every shutter, every crumbling eave. My skin prickles as though tiny insects crawl beneath it. I take a deep breath and force myself to leave. Stumbling down the main street, past the silent houses, I listen as the bells grow fainter with every step. At last, I reach my car. Relief washes over me like cold water on a burn as I slide into the driver's seat, hands trembling, and start the engine. The headlights flick on, illuminating a sign at the village entrance that I hadn't noticed before. In the windshield's reflection, the glass feels like a mirror. I see something pale moving between the houses. The bells chime one last time my name, clear and unmistakable, and then fall silent. Heart pounding, I press the gas and speed away. The roar of the engine breaks the oppressive quiet, but I can't shake the feeling that the village isn't finished with me. Even as I reach the open road, my hands shake uncontrollably, my chest tight with unease. The faint hum of the bells lingers in my ears, just below the edge of hearing. At dawn, I find a diner. Its neon lights and the smell of coffee feel foreign after the night I've had. In the bathroom, I splash cold water on my face and glance at the mirror. For a brief second, my reflection flickers, and I hear the faintest chime. Exhaustion must be playing tricks on me, or perhaps not. Deep down, I know the village isn't truly behind me. The memory of the bells hums softly, waiting, patient. I fear they'll ring my name again. The cabinet story. It began around midnight. A faint rustling, like old paper shuffling in a sealed library, broke the stillness. Lying awake in my room, I stared at the faint outline of the wooden cabinet I'd inherited. The cabinet was tall and imposing, carved from dark wood with intricate, stern designs. It had belonged to my great-uncle, at least. That's what the lawyer had said. I'd never met the man. He passed without any direct heirs, and through some convoluted chain of forgotten family ties, the property ended up with me. Along with it came the cabinet. I moved in about a week ago, but the place still reeked of varnish and stale carpets. The bedroom was small and perpetually cold, with a dampness that clung to my clothes and skin. I hadn't slept well since arriving. Every night, I'd wake to some unshakable feeling that I wasn't alone. I woke each night, heart racing, aware of something wrong, something watching me. At first, I blamed my nerves. This house was my only option after losing my apartment. I had no money and no alternatives. Fixing it up and selling it later was the plan, but the longer I stayed, the more oppressive it felt. The cabinet's doors creaked randomly, even when untouched. Inside, its drawers were filled with old photographs, formal portraits of stern-looking people in dark, outdated clothing. Their gazes were cold and direct, with no children among them. I didn't recognize their faces. They weren't family, at least not anyone from the few albums I had seen. Maybe they were friends or subjects of my great-uncle, who was supposedly a historian. The lawyer didn't offer much detail, and I never cared to ask more. But by my second night, the whispers began. I woke to the sound of shuffling pages, soft and insistent. Voices followed, urgent, unintelligible murmurs. My heart thudded as I flicked on the lamp and stared at the cabinet. The doors were shut, the drawers closed. When I gathered the courage to check, everything seemed in place except for one photograph. It had shifted to the front, a woman in a high-collared dress, her sharp eyes seemingly filled with disapproval. Nervous laughter bubbled out of me. I shut the cabinet and tried to convince myself I'd misremembered the photo's placement. But the tension in my shoulders lingered, and I didn't sleep. By the fourth night, my patience was fraying. Each evening, I double-checked the photo's positions and counted them. 11 in total, 10 men and 1 woman, all dressed in clothing from the late 19th or early 20th century. None smiled, none broke eye contact with the camera. Their expressions seemed defiant, as though they refused to be understood. That night, the whispers came again, pulling me from sleep. Furious, I yanked open the cabinet drawer. The top photo had changed. The man with the mustache looked subtly different. His posture shifted, his narrowed eyes fixed on me. My chest tightened. I felt scrutinized. Desperate, I grabbed the photograph and stormed to the kitchen, flicking on every light. Shaking, I threw it into the trash bin and slammed the lid shut. Relief flooded me, as though a spell had been broken. Returning upstairs, I checked the cabinet. The top photograph was replaced by another man, dressed in the same rigid suit, his expression just as cold. Exhausted, I forced myself to bed, determined to ignore the whispers. Morning came, and I opened the trash bin, expecting to find the crumpled photo inside. It was gone, only coffee grounds remained. Panic set in as I rushed upstairs. The photograph was back in the cabinet, neatly stacked with the others. Cold sweat gathered on my forehead as I touched the edges. They felt brittle, like aged parchment. Determined to end it, I gathered all the photographs, placed them in a cardboard box, and drove to the edge of the property near an overgrown patch of trees. There, I lit a small fire and tossed the box in. I stood back as the flames consumed the cardboard and the frames inside, releasing a foul stench of burnt wood and musty paper. My eyes stung from the smoke, but I stayed until nothing remained but ash and charred scraps. Feeling satisfied, I returned to the house. As I entered the bedroom, nausea rolled through me. The cabinet drawer was slightly open, and the photographs were backstacked neatly inside. Worse, the faces had changed. These weren't strangers anymore. Their bone structures, their eyes, their expressions, they all resembled older versions of me. The woman's sharp features mirrored my own, distorted and dressed in old-fashioned attire. Each set of eyes glared at me, filled with betrayal. I doubled over, my pulse roaring in my ears. This couldn't be real. The nights that followed blurred together, half sleep, constant fear, and restless awakenings. The sounds of pages flipping became louder, clearer. The whispers grew sharper, and now I could almost make out words. They beckoned, half-formed thoughts tugging at the edges of my mind. Come closer, must come closer. I lay drenched in sweat, gripping my sheets, struggling to breathe quietly as if any noise might betray me. My hands shook each time I reached for the cabinet. I tried locking its doors and barricading it with a chair, but nothing worked. By dawn, the photographs always rearranged themselves into a new order. Each face looked more like mine. One even had my exact eyes, complete with the small scar above my left eyebrow. I tried calling for help, but the cell service was too weak, and the landline in the house was dead. Leaving wasn't an option. I had no money and no place to go. This house was supposed to be my last refuge. Still, a sick sense of curiosity rooted me here. I needed to understand what was happening. Late one afternoon, I worked up the nerve to inspect the cabinet thoroughly. Behind the main drawer, I found a small hidden compartment. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, its ink faded and cramped handwriting nearly illegible. I could make out fragments, inheritance, binding, bloodline, and portraits that claim their own. It spoke of faces drawn closer as the cycle completes. A chill ran down my spine as I stuffed the parchment back, heart racing. This was no coincidence. This was tied to my family, and it wanted me. That night, I resolved to stay awake. Around midnight, the whispers began. "He's stubborn," one voice muttered. Another replied, quieter, "He must step inside willingly." My throat dried at the realization they thought I would climb into the cabinet. The idea was absurd, yet my pulse thundered as if my body believed it. The photographs were talking about me now. My sweat turned cold at the thought of what might happen next. Crawling out of bed, I crept toward the cabinet, each floorboard creaking ominously. I pressed my ear against the wood and felt a faint vibration within, as though dozens of voices crowded a small space. My palms slick with sweat, I pulled the drawer open slightly. It resisted at first, but then slid smoothly, revealing the photographs fanned out like playing cards. The top portrait was now an older, hardened version of my own face. Its eyes glinted with malice. I slammed the drawer shut, nearly catching my fingers. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing a knife, I began shredding the photos with furious determination. The brittle paper resisted, and as the blade sliced through, the whispers grew louder and more panicked. For a brief moment, I thought the eyes in the photos darted about, desperate. When I finished, the scraps littered the floor in dozens of pieces. I gathered the remnants into a pillowcase, ran to the kitchen, and stuffed them down the sink. Pouring boiling water over them, I turned the faucet on full blast until the sink overflowed. My hands trembled, but I felt a sliver of hope. This had to work. Yet when I returned upstairs, the photographs were back whole, arranged in a neat fan. They no longer depicted strangers. Every face was mine, captured from different angles, their expressions cold and judgmental. Something inside me snapped. I stumbled onto the bed, gasping for air as the wind outside rattled the windows. The next few nights passed in a haze of sleepless fear. I sat upright, staring at the cabinet and straining to hear the whispers. They spoke of me as though laying a trap. "He must lean closer," one voice said. Another added, "If we catch his reflection in the glass, ... I shivered at the word reflection. The frames of the photographs were glass. Was that how they'd pull me in? If I stared too long, would I see something that dragged me into their world? Desperate, I tried to move the cabinet. It was heavier than it looked, its wood dense and unyielding. Muscles burning, I managed to scrape it halfway into the hallway. That's when the whispers turned frantic, and the wood vibrated under my hands. I lost my grip and stumbled back, scraping my knuckles. In the blink of an eye, the cabinet shifted back into its original position, as if nothing had happened. My lungs constricted, and the very air seemed to turn against me. Every midnight, the voices grow louder. They know I'm afraid. They know I won't leave. And I know they're getting bolder. Last night, I dared to look directly into one photograph. My reflection in the glass smiled back, even though I wasn't smiling. My stomach twisted, and I turned away, heart pounding. My appearance is changing. The bathroom mirror shows it my features sharper, older, more like the stern faces in the photographs. My eyes now carry the same judgmental glint I'd seen staring back at me. Tonight, I lie in bed, my gaze fixed on the cabinet. I've tried everything, destroying it, burning the photos, even leaving the house. Nothing works. They always return. I'm trapped, held here by forces I can't fight or flee. The whispers are louder now, the pages turning faster as though flipping through versions of me, deciding which form to take. My breathing is shallow, my body drenched in sweat. I know that as soon as I drift off, they will come for me again. I don't think they can kill me, not directly, but every night leaves me feeling emptier, less certain of what's real. At dawn, I touch my face, and it feels wrong, unfamiliar. My skin tingles, as though the boundary between me and the photographs is wearing thin. Sometimes when I pass by reflective surfaces, I catch movement in the glass, something just out of sync with my own actions. I've stopped looking at myself. What would be the point? No one would believe my story anyway. I have no evidence, no proof, just a growing sense of dread that I'm losing this battle. Each midnight, I sit in the darkness and listen to them. They plot patiently, knowing I'm alone and vulnerable. The cabinet, silent in the daylight, comes alive at night with their murmurs. I feel their stares, their judgment, their hunger. They're waiting for the perfect moment to pull me in. I can feel it, their quiet determination to take me. I haven't escaped, and I don't think I ever will. The photographs remain, locked behind those doors, watching and waiting, their hold on me unrelenting. I'm certain they'll never let me go. Mirror and corridor story. The first night in that old house stands vivid in my mind. My breath felt unnaturally loud against the silence. Now, as I lie awake in the attic's dim light, my mouth is dry, and the hairs on my arms prickle as though charged with static. Clenching a flashlight between my teeth, I dig through a dusty crate filled with newspapers and rusted nails. The air is thick with the smell of aged wood and mold. I've been here only a few days after leaving my noisy highway-side apartment, but something about this house gnaws at me, a subtle pressure at the back of my mind, whispering I shouldn't have come. When I first saw the house, the realtor brushed aside my questions. Yes, it was old. Yes, the previous owner had disappeared or died. Details were vague. The price was good, and I needed a fresh start. But I should have trusted my instincts when I saw the peeling wallpaper on the stairwell and the crooked chandelier in the living room. The place felt hollow, like a shell. Now, here I am, trying to ignore the sheet-draped object in the attic corner, a tall, human height shape covered in a gray, dust-stained cloth. My eyes keep drifting toward it. Earlier that day, I'd noticed the large object, but dismissed it, too busy setting up my bed downstairs and unpacking a few essentials. But tonight, something woke me, a soft creak directly above my bedroom. My heart pounded as I climbed the attic stairs, determined to find a logical explanation, perhaps a loose beam or a draft. Yet when I opened the attic door, the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the room itself was alive and breathing. My flashlight's beam skimmed over wooden beams and forgotten furniture, and then I heard it again, a faint, drawn-out creak. It was too deliberate to be the house settling. It sounded like a whisper, beckoning me closer. I swallowed hard, my palms damp as my legs stiffened. The sheet-covered object stood in the corner, half hidden behind stacked chairs. Ignoring it became impossible. Step by step, I approached, reaching out to the dusty cloth. As I pulled it free, a cloud of particles erupted into the air, making me cough. Beneath it was a tall mirror with a carved wooden frame, its surface slightly warped and cracked in one corner. I angled my flashlight, peering into my reflection, pale, gaunt, my eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But behind my reflection, there was something else, a shape. At first, I thought it was a smudge or stain on the glass, but no, it was a figure standing behind me, indistinct, its features shrouded. A wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over hollow eyes. My breath hitched. Whipping around, I shined the flashlight into the room, finding only empty chairs and a trunk. Turning back to the mirror, the figure remained, hovering over my shoulder as though it hadn't moved at all. My throat tightened, and my hand trembled as I moved the flashlight side to side, testing for tricks of light. But the figure didn't waver. I couldn't make out its face, yet I felt it smiling or wanting to. Panicked, I grabbed the sheet and flung it back over the mirror, stumbling toward the attic door. The floorboards groaned under my hurried steps. Back in my room downstairs, I lay awake on the mattress, breathing shallowly. My eyes refused to close, haunted by the image of the figure behind me. The silence in the house was thicker now, pressing into my ears like an unseen weight. I could hear my heart pounding, each beat blurring my vision. I tried to speak, to demand who or what they were, but my throat tightened, and all that escaped was a cough that echoed unnaturally in the space. The reflection moved again, lifting its hand a split second after mine, as if struggling to mimic my motion. I reached toward the mirror, my fingers trembling, intending to test if the surface was solid. But before I touched it, the glass rippled like disturbed water under shifting light. Panic surged through me, and I yanked my hand back, my veins electrified by fear. There was something there, not just in the mirror, but behind it. I could feel its gaze, feeding on the anxiety twisting my muscles. The corridor seemed to close in around me, its walls constricting. My breaths grew shallow and erratic. What would happen if I fainted? Would I wake up in another dimension, surrounded by the distorted shapes I feared? Staggering back, I tripped over a rug and nearly dropped the flashlight. The whispers surged into a chaotic crescendo, and the faces of the sculptures twisted further, their mouths stretching wide in silent screams. I bolted, crouched low as my shoulders scraped against the shelves, scattering grimoires to the floor. I didn't stop until I had climbed the stairs and burst into the main store. There I crouched behind a stack of dusty chairs, struggling to catch my breath as sweat glued my clothes to my skin. I don't know how long I stayed there, heart racing, and eyes locked on the floorboards. Eventually, I locked the basement door and retreated to my room upstairs. For days, I couldn't eat. Food tasted like ash. My reflection in the bedroom mirror looked wrong. My eyes were sunken, and my skin had a dark, hollow quality. I jumped at every sound, certain something had followed me. Even the store above the basement felt still, as if the antiques themselves were holding their breath. Once, in a half-sleep, I thought I saw something in the corner of my mirror, a faint outline of the sculptures, shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. When I turned on the light, the shape vanished, but the hammering of my heart didn't stop. Today, I forced myself to check the basement door. It was still locked, but I heard whispers through the wood, scratching at the edges of my mind. I know the corridor remains, unchanged yet shifting in some way I can't fully grasp. If I were to open that door, I'd see the sculptures again, their faces rearranged, their judgment sharper. And the mirror would still be there, waiting, a thin barrier between two worlds. Whatever lurks behind it hasn't stopped watching, waiting for its moment. Its hunger grows, and I don't know how much longer I can resist. Even now, standing upstairs, I catch a faint flicker in the store's glass cabinets. My reflection is just slightly delayed, and my eyes seem darker than they should be. I can taste the gritty dust in the air, like crushed glass on my tongue. In my final glance, I see something in the glass shapes hovering just behind me. This isn't over. It's only waiting. That night stands clear in my memory, because it was the first time I felt truly trapped in my own home. The chair, the exact moment I sensed it, is etched in my mind. I sat on my couch, still damp from a dash through the rain earlier. The wind rattled the windows, and a faint groan echoed through the hallway behind me. Just a storm in an old house, I reassured myself. Yet, as my anxious eyes darted across the room, I spotted the leather armchair. It looked unchanged, its mustard brown upholstery worn with creases and scratches. I never used it, never touched it. Something about it always felt lifeless, out of place. The chair came with the house, part of an inheritance from an uncle I barely knew. I'd often thought of getting rid of it, but never followed through. Now, I wished I had. That night, it seemed as though the seat was sinking beneath an unseen weight. Invisible, yes, but undeniably real. My heart raced, and I blinked hard, trying to dismiss the sight. Perhaps it was the storm casting strange shadows or the flickering lamp playing tricks on me. But no, the stiff leather cushion was undeniably dipping, as though supporting a heavy body. I tried to ignore it, turning back to the TV and pretending to focus on a late-night rerun. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, though by what, I couldn't say. The hair on my neck bristled as I shifted on the couch, the rough fabric brushing my arms. There was a faint smell in the air, like aged leather mingled with damp earth. Then came the soft squeak of the armchair's springs. The house was old and full of quirks, but this was different. My palms grew clammy, and my toes curled into the rug. I wanted to ignore it, but the sounds became more distinct, like someone shifting to get comfortable. I stood slowly, taking a hesitant step forward. The wooden floor creaked underfoot, and I wondered if the unseen presence could hear me too. Reaching the coffee table, I squinted at the chair. The cushion was unmistakably pressed down, then faintly rose and sank again, as though someone were subtly adjusting their posture. My throat went dry, and I retreated to the couch, heart pounding. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled in circles around the house. I tried to rationalize the bizarre sight. Maybe the foam in the cushion was defective, or the frame warped from moisture. Yet no logic could explain the slow, rhythmic movement. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat rigid on the couch, my eyes flicking between the hallway, the locked door, and that cursed chair. When dawn finally arrived, the rain had eased, and the air smelled of damp leaves. My eyes were gritty and burning from exhaustion. I decided then and there to get rid of the chair. Not donate it, just throw it outside to rot in the mud. Socks sliding on the floor, I marched to the front door, grabbed the knob, and twisted. It wouldn't budge. Oddly, the lock wasn't even engaged. I tried harder, putting my shoulder into it, but still, it didn't move. Confused, I went to the kitchen door, but it too was stuck, and even the windows seemed sealed tight. The house, it seemed, wouldn't let me leave. Frustrated and unnerved, I returned to the living room, determined to push the armchair over or drag it out of the way. As I approached, a low groan emanated from its frame, like old wood protesting under strain. Then I saw the backrest shift, subtle folds in the leather adjusting, as though someone were settling into it. A cold sensation, like icy fingers, brushed my shoulder. I spun around, but nothing was there, just the stale air and the thudding of my heart. I paced the room, arms crossed tight over my chest, my jaw clenched so hard it ached. Weak morning light filtered through the rain-slick windows, bathing the room in a sickly yellow hue. That's when I noticed a faint discoloration on the floor near the chair's feet. Kneeling, I touched the wood. It was unnaturally cold, and my fingers came away oily. Disgust and dread knotted in my stomach. I needed answers. I rummaged through boxes of my uncle's old papers in the storage closet, searching for a clue. Amidst the clutter of receipts, and letters. I found a photograph of the living room from decades ago. The same armchair sat in the same spot. A man with a stern face occupied the seat, his features blurred by the passage of time. On the back of the photo, in my uncle's spidery handwriting, were the words, "Don't move it. Ever." A shiver ran down my spine. From the hallway, I stared at the chair. It sat motionless yet somehow oppressive, the leather gleaming faintly in the dim light. The house creaked as if mocking me. My uncle's warning echoed in my head. Did he know about this? Was that why he left the house to me? My fists tightened as my heart pounded, the smell in the room growing stronger like aged leather mixed with something sour. By midday, exhaustion overtook me. I tried to rest on the couch, but every time I settled, that cold, unseen presence loomed behind me. At one point, I could have sworn something brushed my hair aside light and deliberate, like a dead hand grazing my scalp. I jumped, banging my knee on the coffee table, cursing through the pain. The chair stayed silent, its cushion molded around an invisible form. Tears welled up from a mix of fear and pain. Desperate, I grabbed a sheet from the linen drawer and approached the chair. The floor was ice cold beneath my bare feet as I tossed the sheet over it. But the fabric snagged midair, catching on something unseen, as if over a shoulder. A stifled cry escaped my throat. I forced the sheet down, and it draped unevenly over the chair. For a fleeting moment, I saw it a vague, bulky human outline beneath the cloth. My heart raced so violently I could hardly stand. As I stared, the sheet dipped where a head might be, tilting upward as though looking at me. I stumbled back, and the sheet slid off, soundlessly falling to the floor. Panicking, I rushed to the door, yanking at the handle and screaming in frustration. The door wouldn't budge. I tried the windows, pounding on the glass, but nothing gave way. My phone was useless, the power flickered, and the entire house seemed to hum with tension, as if it held its breath. As evening fell, shadows stretched longer, and the room felt even heavier. I found myself whispering to the chair, pleading, "What do you want?" My voice sounded unfamiliar, trembling. I circled the room under the faint glow of a single lamp. Its weak light glinted off the chair, highlighting every crease and scratch in its leather. Had they always been that deep? At one point, I considered burning it. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed matches, and returned to the chair. My hands shook so badly that I dropped most of the matches onto the floor. Finally, I lit one, but as I brought it closer, a cold gust snuffed out the flame. Again and again, it happened, an icy breath from nowhere, asserting its control. Nausea overtook me, and I stumbled to the bathroom, retching into the sink. Looking into the mirror, I hardly recognized my reflection, wide-eyed, sweaty, and unkempt. For a moment, I thought I saw something behind me in the doorway, a faint silhouette of a head and shoulders. I spun around, but nothing was there, yet the reflection had shown it, just a second earlier. My heart thundered as I backed into the hallway, moving as quietly as possible. The house felt alive now, its walls almost leaning inward. Back in the living room, I noticed something new. The chair had shifted slightly, no longer facing the TV, but angled toward me. The sour smell was stronger. An image of the photograph flashed in my mind, the stern-faced man who had once sat in the chair. Was he still here, in some way? Night fell hard, with rain tapping insistently at the windows. I paced the room, massaging my temples as a sharp ache settled between my shoulders. Every time I looked at the chair, it seemed to shift slightly, the leather rippling like shallow breaths. I tried to shove the coffee table aside in frustration, but it caught on a warped floorboard. My emotions boiled over, and I shouted, "Leave me alone!" My voice cracked. The only response was a faint squeak from the chair's springs. I collapsed onto the couch, trembling, when I felt it a firm, cold grip on my shoulder. I screamed, jerking forward, but nothing was there. The sensation lingered, leaving a chilling ache in my muscles. As time dragged on, my eyelids grew heavy, but I couldn't fully rest. Every time I drifted off, faint whispers like secrets told by creaking leather would pull me back. At one point, I dared to glance at the chair's reflection in the glass of a cabinet door. A faint silhouette was there, a broad head, shoulders, and hands gripping the armrests. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared, frozen. When I looked back at the chair itself, nothing was visible except the indent in the cushion. My thoughts spiraled as desperation clawed at me. I tried to break a window with a dining chair, but the glass wouldn't shatter. It was as solid as stone. When I turned back, the armchair had shifted again, now facing me squarely. It dominated the room, its presence inescapable. I felt trapped, watched, and judged. Tears welled in my eyes as I dropped to the floor, unable to fight any longer. The storm outside raged, while inside, I waged a silent, losing battle against something I couldn't name. In the final hours of that torturous night, I slumped against the wall, my body shaking with silent sobs. Exhaustion took hold, and I raised my head one last time to look at the glass cabinet. For a fleeting moment, the silhouette in the reflection was clearer than ever, a broad figure leaning forward, studying me with dark, unrelenting curiosity. I blinked, and the silhouette vanished, leaving the reflection of an empty room. Yet the chair's real cushion still bore weight, as though mocking me by showing what should be while I endured the reality. Dawn's pale light crept through the windows. My lips were dry, my throat raw. I tried the front door once more, and this time, it opened easily without resistance. Outside, the world seemed normal: wet grass, distant trees, and a dull gray sky. I stumbled into the muddy yard. Looking back, the chair still sat framed in the doorway. I could swear it moved slightly, but I turned away, heart racing, and slammed the door shut. I never returned to that house. I left the property for good, driving away as soon as the car started. Days later, I found myself flinching at every small noise, glancing over my shoulder as though expecting someone or something was following me. Store windows reflected shadows that seemed to linger just behind me. My skin never stopped feeling cold, as if touched by unseen fingers. Even now, writing this from a cramped motel room, I catch glimpses of faint shapes and reflective surfaces. The memory of that armchair weighs heavily on me, the invisible occupant, the cold pressure on my shoulder, and the soft creak of leather. Though I left the house, I doubt I left it empty. Something remains, clinging to me,